So Nalini, how's been the whole week? Dhruv and Nalini, I hope the whole week has been pretty good, although quite intense and busy.
Great, some great presentations. Yeah, really, really amazing. I'm looking forward to being live though. It's just yeah, it's a whole different thing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dr. Rajat, I saw him as an attendee, so I've promoted him to panelist.
Okay. Yeah.
But I've promoted him to panelist. He should be here in a minute. Here he is.
Yeah, he is here. Hi, Rajat. Yeah, I think he just needs to unmute himself. Yeah, I think now he's unmuted.
Hi.
Hi, Rajat. Can you please switch on your camera?
I'm trying to do that.
All right. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, what do you think of your new design of your Parliament building? I just saw it like yesterday. I know there's a lot of controversy from the architects. Nothing controversial. Just.
Okay, I think that's a whole lot of new, different discussion. Probably, Glenn, when you come here, we can have it over a drink and a longish dinner, or station. So, yeah, I mean, yeah. So there've been a comparison from different type of things, including one particular building across the world. So,
yeah.
Hi, Rajat. Now we can see you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear, see you clearly. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Let me try and improve my voice.
Yeah, a little bit, if you can, maybe a bit closer and.
So, Rajat, maybe we are seeing each other after 30 years today, or what? We were in Maryland together, right?
That's right.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yes. Oh, yeah, that's another connection. Yes. College Park.
College Park. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah. That's right. Yes. Yes. Yes.
That's right. Is it better now? Is the voice better or?
Yeah, much, very clear. At least to me, it's very clear. What about the others? Dhruv, is it clear now?
Yep, it's clear.
Okay. All right. Okay. So.
Wonderful.
Okay, so we are all set, and so just for everybody else right now, I mean, of course, we won't have so much of time of later introductions on these lines. So just want to quickly mention this interesting aspect that Dheeraj just mentioned about Rajat, and I of course knew both that Dheeraj had done his PhD from College Park, of course, in computer science, and I knew Rajat had done in economics, but and I also knew that probably in this around same time, but I never sort of thought of this particular connection that they were together at that particular campus, at least for partially, probably 2 or 3 years, I guess. They were together at in that campus, and so. And in those days, obviously, there won't be too many Indians at that point of time. And in this case, it also happens that both of them from Delhi itself. So Dheeraj is also originally from Delhi. So that way, probably there would have been some connections there itself. So that's interesting.
We should catch up Dheeraj after this.
So 8:30 now? Dhruv?
Mine is 8:30. Yeah, let's give folks a couple of more minutes and then we'll quickly start.
All right.
I had stopped recording. I should start that. Nalini, I hope you're ready.
Yep, ready whenever you are.
I think let's start. We have only a 1 hour for panel.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I think let's start.
Let me make sure the recording has started.
Okay.
Oh, I hate when this does that. 1 second. Come on. Yes. Yes, recording is going on. Yes, go ahead, Nalini.
Okay, welcome to the final day of Connections 2020. Today we're going to start with a panel and then do a tutorial on 5G. I am Nalini Elkins, and I am the president of Industry Network Technology Council, and we have Dhruv, who is the president of India Internet Engineering Society, and then Kathy, who's the chair of the board of INTC. Next slide, please. And so we're going to kick off with a closing keynote panel. And the panel will be India and the Future of the Internet. And it will be moderated by Deepak Maheshwari. And you might remember him from the opening keynote. Deepak was a co-founder of NIXI and so many other things. We'll talk about him in just a moment. And he will be introducing the rest of the panelists. And then we'll do a tutorial on 5G for an IP engineer, and then IETF network slicing by Dhruv and Srihari. Next foil, please. So again, you know the etiquette. Go ahead and please ask questions for our panelists, or put something into the chat window if you want to speak, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. We've been using Zoom all these years, and so I think we're very good with that. Next foil, please. Thank you so much to our sponsors, Internet Society and Juniper Networks. They have both sponsored us for almost the entire time, 3 and 4 years. So thank you so much. We couldn't do this without them. Next foil. Stay in touch with us. We do lots of things both in India and then in the US with INTC. In the India Internet Engineering Society, there's monthly RFCs we love. You know, in some ways, having this time of the pandemic has allowed more virtual contact in some ways, and more meetings for RFCs we love. It's just a great venue. As far as INTC, we're going to have our first our first membership meeting next year, and you know, we only started this first year, and already we have nearly 1,500 people who have signed up and joined some of our webinars throughout the year. And so that's just I'm just real happy with what has happened. So come join us. Have a say in the future of INTC. Both these organizations are nonprofit. Next slide, please. So let's go. Well, so what are we going to talk about here? So really, India is one of the most key players in what happens in the future of the internet. Many countries follow the example of India. And I will say, in terms of much of the world, India is more a model that they can emulate than places in the West. And so what happens in India is key to what happens into the rest of the world. And you will remember that Jannah, when he was talking about quick, said that quick, video over quick in places like India is much better. So we need to be thinking about things like that. What can we do for the large unconnected population? Where do we go? Because as I say, what happens in India will happen in the rest of the world. Next slide, please. So Deepak, I will be handing this off to Deepak. He is a senior visiting fellow at iCareer and distinguished fellow at CUTS. He has such an incredible biography. One of the key things that I think that really distinguishes him is the intersection of policy and technology. So many people who are doing policy really do not understand technology in any sense. I don't even know how they can do policy. Deepak is not like that. Deepak has a law degree, but he also has technology degrees. And he was co-founder of NIXI, has done many things in terms of the IEEE Internet Initiative, Secretary of ISP Association. It's just an honor to have Deepak become a part of the core team working with IISOC and INTC. As I say, we're honored to have him. Next foil, please. And then so Deepak, I'm gonna go ahead and now turn this over to you. Thank you so much.
Deepak, you are mute.
Okay, thanks. So thanks, Nalini, and welcome everybody for this particular session for the closing of IESOC and INTC event this whole week. And what we are going to talk here is about, of course, India and the future of Internet. And when I'm saying India and the future of Internet is not just about future of Internet in India, but future of Internet at large. And I have a very interesting, diverse, but at the same time, I'll say very committed and passionate set of panelists. So let me just introduce them briefly. So let me start with Glenn. Right now, he's the CIO of Virtual School of Internet Governance. I've known Glenn for the past several years. We have met at IGF meetings, at ICANN meetings, at ITU, etc. He's been a member of the board of trustee on ISOC. In IEEE, his work on the humanitarian technology actually resulted into Smart Villages initiative. And right now I know there are a lot of people who talk of smart cities, but he is somebody who does talk a lot about smart villages. And one thing that I learned only during this particular process of this, looking at his biography here, was in terms of he's also the editor of Blockchains and Cryptocurrencies International Journal. And the other thing I just want to mention is he's an Indophile. He's a very regular visitor to India and a fantastic photographer. I mean, in fact, I've also seen one of the calendars that he just recently shared with us for the 2021. And interestingly, none of those photographs has Glenn in those, because he's the guy behind the lens in that sense. Next, please. So next we have Anil Jain. He's the CEO of NIXI. Just slightly longer than a quarter back, he's joined NIXI as the CEO, which is National Internet Exchange of India. But I've known him for probably 1.5 decades or so, maybe even longer. So he's an engineer, also an MBA. He did serve almost 40 years of experience in telecom and technology space in the Department of Telecommunications, Bharat Sanchar Nigam Limited, and MTNL. And at the same time, he is not so new to NIXI because he has served for more than a decade at NIXI's board earlier also. So welcome, Anilji. Next, please. So next we have Rajat. Rajat is the director and CEO of iCareer. I've known Rajat since 1997 when he had just joined TRAI, the Indian Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, that had just been set up. And Rajat is a grad of economics from St. Stephen's College in Delhi, the master's from Delhi School of Economics, and then PhD from University of Maryland, College Park. He's worked in World Bank headquarters in Washington, DC as a consultant, but he also has done a lot of other consulting assignments at International Labour Organization, UNCTAD, Learn Asia, ADB, etc. For me, And of course, since 2012, he has been working in ICRIER as the director and CEO, and earlier he was there also as a consultant. Interestingly, Rajat also has had a real teaching experience also. So he has been in the management education and other things also. So he's been a researcher, he's been a regulator in the regulatory institutions, but also as a researcher in think tanks, and of course published very widely and spoken at a lot of places. Next, please. So we also have Dheeraj Sanghi. Dheeraj is currently the director of Punjab Engineering College, Chandigarh, which is actually currently in its centenary year at this point of time. So 1990 years they just completed on 6th of November last month. And but otherwise his full-time role is as a professor of computer science at IIT Kanpur, the same institute from where he had graduated in mid-80s. Probably we have met even at that time when he was still a student there at IIT Kanpur. But I've known him very, very well for almost 20 years. He was instrumental in opening of Wi-Fi in India, but that's something about which both he and I recently wrote on the same day, the same particular incident about that. But very importantly for this particular discussion, Dheeraj was one of the pioneers of IPv6 in India. He's actually done, so almost 20 years back, he was running these workshops and seminars about IPv6. And 20 years back, there were not too many people who knew about internet in India, leave aside IPv6 for that matter. Although he had actually worked on IPv6 way back in 1996 itself on Linux. So, and of course, he's a frequent blogger and a very outspoken faculty member with many other people like Pankaj Jalote and others. Okay. So that's where we are. And let me just start with a question to Rajat. So Rajat, when you're looking at internet, and you've been looking at this at least since 1997, if not earlier, how do you see the role of internet in terms of its economic impact, especially when in terms of its attributes? So about an open internet, about an internet that is interoperable, about an internet that is standards based. How do you see all of this in terms of its economic impact in India? I know ICRIER has done a lot of similar research also in these type of topics, but also in terms of some of the ongoing discussion, where do you see these things? And the other thing that I would just request is that for each of the panelists to restrict their remarks to about 7 minutes each at this point of time, and so that we'll come back again for a few more questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you,
Rajat, please.
Deepak. Can you hear
me? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Deepak. And what a privilege it is to be a part of this very exalted group. And I see so many, experts and qualified people here. So thank you so much for inviting me to this closing panel. It's indeed a privilege to be on it. So let me try and address your question from the point of view of India and also what it means for the rest of the world. So, the impacts of the internet for emerging economies like India have been sort of profound. And the reason why the impacts of the internet have been profound in markets like India is because of the sort of deficiencies of the other form of infrastructure. So what the internet and telecommunications in particular has done for emerging markets is that it has captured a lot of the impacts. I believe Glenn is having some difficulty to hear.
Is it better now?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Better?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Rajat.
Just give me a minute.
Okay.
We could hear you, but your volume was really low. So you have to say something.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah,
that's better.
That's better.
Okay. Let me start over. If that's better, let me start over. Thank you for inviting me to this plenary closing session, Deepak. It's a privilege to be on in this panel. Let me go straight to your question, which is what are the impacts of the internet and what are the likely impacts going to be post-pandemic of the internet, especially in countries like India. I've done a lot of work in India. I've also looked at what's happening in the rest of the world. But what I can say immediately about telecommunications and the internet is that if you look at it as a general purpose technology, if you look at the internet or the digital interface as GPT, then you begin to think of, from an economics perspective, you begin to think of this as the same impact that the roads and electricity had before on GDP and the spillover benefits on the economy. And the internet is already replicating those kinds of impacts. And I think it's doing a lot more, and I'll try and substantiate that. But in developing countries, emerging markets like India, the internet has done even more, because remember, when mobile technology came into India in the late 90s and spread to the rest of the emerging world in the late 90s, the mature markets, the developed markets already had pervasive fixed line connectivity. So mobile technology was pretty much an add-on to what already existed in the developed markets. But in India and some other emerging markets where fixed line connectivity was not so good, mobile technology emerged as a first-time access to connectivity and a first-time access to communications. And that is what is happening also in the internet space. It is in the mobile sort of internet where people are getting their first taste of internet. So if you compare developed markets and emerging markets, you will notice, and there is lots of empirical evidence to back this up, that for every 10% or every increase in mobile or every increase in mobile broadband or every increase in data internet, 10% increase in, let's say, internet traffic, the sort of impacts that you see generated on the GDP are significantly larger than in developed markets. So for India, for instance, ICRIER has recently studied that a 10% increase in internet traffic will lead to about a 3.2% increase in GDP. And you can do this for India because there's a lot of variation across Indian states, both in terms of per capita incomes, as well as in terms of GDP, as well as in terms of penetration of the internet infrastructure. And therefore, we've been able to sort of estimate the kind of impacts these technologies are likely to have in India. Now, as I said, the impacts is much larger because they make up for the deficiency of other kinds of infrastructure. For example, information is now available to farmers. You have connectivity that is available and communications flows much faster. So for a while, I think communications will make up for the deficiency of other kinds of infrastructure, but I don't think it is anybody's case, and definitely it is not my case or ICRIER's case, that you can forget about developing the other kind of complementary infrastructure. So I think internet technologies and communications technologies will act as a force multiplier when you have other forms of technologies, other forms of infrastructure already there. So if you have a better road network, if you have a better soft infrastructure like skills, education, and the ability to use infrastructure, the ability to use internet infrastructure more productively, then I think internet will begin to have much more of an impact, and the force multiplier of the internet, especially in countries like India, will be much more. So I expect in the future, when the diffusion of broadband especially becomes of critical mass, like right now in India, the diffusion of broadband is not very high. The diffusion of internet is fairly high. There are 800 million internet users, but broadband, which I think will have substantive and profound spillover, what economists call multiplier effects, that connectivity is relatively limited. And therefore, the kinds of things that you can do are limited in nature, limited in space geographically, and these need to be also sort of embraced in rural areas so that they can do a lot more. So I think once we get a critical mass of broadband, both in rural areas and in the rest of the country, I think the impacts will be profound, even more profound than they are. but they will work much better when you have other kinds of complementary infrastructure also in place. And let me re-emphasize that what I am saying means that the existing of roads, the existence of other infrastructure, the existence of soft infrastructure will add much more value to the internet. My second point, and I'll stop after this, and I'll be happy to take questions post this, Deepak. The second point is that the pandemic has sort of accelerated and catalyzed what internet can do. And some of what has happened during the pandemic and some of what that will happen after the pandemic is a lot of people will now, a lot of businesses, a lot of individuals have embraced the internet. And some of them might go back to the earlier ways of doing things, but I'm sure that some of it will remain permanent. And this will become a part of their daily lives. It will become a part of the way business is done. It will become a part of the way that consumers interact with businesses and interact with one another. And there'll be a lot of businesses that will be created. Already, there are examples of so many businesses that have been created post-pandemic around the internet. And because there is safety, because there is security, there is sort of this confidence in the people that they can work on the internet and that businesses will be robust and will be safeguarded against the security issues. Of course, security can never be foolproof. But the point is that once you have this critical mass that has been created because of the pandemic and so many people have come on board, what the digital economy does to the system is that creates a network effect. And those network effects become so endemic and so large that it then becomes difficult to sort of do business without having an interface with the internet, without having an interface with the digital economy. So I think what we need to do so that we can leverage it in India, and I can speak about India because I've followed this economy for such a long time. What I think we need to do for India is to understand first, as Nalini was saying, you need to understand what technology is able to do. And if you are able to understand what technology and the internet has done during the pandemic and what it is likely to do, post-COVID, if we've understood that, the trajectory of the movement is away from voice and towards data, it is completely in favor of enablement of businesses. It is telecommunications and digital technologies are now becoming platforms for spillover impact so that other things can happen much more efficiently. If we agree with that, if we understand that that is going to happen, then I think what policy and regulation needs to do is to create an enabling framework such that these benefits can be leveraged. And in India, what has often happened is the telecom sector has been seen in isolation, has been seen much more in and of itself, and has been used as the cash cow by the government. Of course, in emerging markets, what happens is that the sources of revenue for the government become limited, and once you have a sector that is doing really well, that is roaring, that is booming, then it becomes naturally a tendency for government is to try and use it as much as possible to get in taxes for itself. But I think what we need to understand, the taxes will come, the revenues from telecommunications will come, but maybe they'll come through the indirect mechanism rather than through the direct mechanism of taxing the sector. There's another problem in India, which is, of course, the financial health of the telecom and the digital operators, but I'm happy to talk about that later. But the 2 points I wish to make is that the impacts in emerging markets are going to be profound of the digital economy. The pandemic has emphasized that even more. And if we have to leverage those benefits and ensure that these become somehow quasi-permanent and permanent, we'll have to, the policy and regulatory environment within the country will have to be looked at a different lens. We'll have to look at it much less in isolation and much more integrated with other sectors, because there are security issues that pan across sectors and not the telecom sector. So if we have to leverage those benefits, we have to begin to think about regulation in a much more integrated manner and in a much less sort of imposition of taxes within the sector, and hope that the revenues will come, but they will come from the spillover benefits in the form of indirect taxes. I'll be happy, Deepak, to sort of expand on what I've said, but thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thanks, Rajat, for this tour de force in terms of how these impacts are happening. But very importantly, what is happening in India does not impact just in India, but actually does have a spillover effect, I would say, just like you mentioned, in terms of internet users, among other things. In this case, whatever has happens in India actually also has a widespread across the world, as was mentioned by Nalini also earlier in that sense. So obviously, India does have whatever happens here has an impact here, but also globally, especially in the global south, where a lot of people might emulate. So obviously, it does make sense for us to do things right, because if we do something bad, even that will be emulated. But if we do something right, that was likely to be emulated elsewhere. So let me move over to Anil. So you've been running, of course, NIXI for past few months only. So, but at the same time, NIXI is a company that does, I'll say, three things, which in terms of, so it runs internet exchange points, it has the .in domain names, including, of course, now you are also offering domain name registration in the Indian languages. Plus, also it's the National Internet Registry, in the sense that it allocates the IP addresses, both V4 and V6, as well as the AS numbers. And one of the other things that a lot of people do not know about NIXI is that NIXI also hosts three mirror servers, three root servers mirror in India. So that's the other very important, I'll say, core functionality of the internet, which is largely invisible. And that's, I think, a good thing, that this is not something that too many people are engaged in, but this is something very, very profound in terms of the way internet works. So I want to ask you two things. One is, how have you seen the role of NIXI itself evolving, because you have been, of course, on the board of NIXI for earlier also, in terms of helping the whole internet economy and the internet ecosystem in the country grow in terms of diversity, languages, spread, etc. And second thing is, very specifically, because in this particular event, we have talked a lot about IPv6 in particular, including a tutorial on that, was in terms of IPv6, how are you seeing the not just the allocation of IPv6, which of course we can all see on the NIXI's website in terms of how the growth on the IPv6 allocations has happened, but more importantly, in terms of usage, readiness, and adoption of that, both in the government as well as in the enterprises. Yeah. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Thank you, Deepak, and all eminent personalities on the panel. Good evening to all of you from Indian Standard and whoever is from other part of the country. So good day and good morning to all of you. A very interesting question on this, but before coming to NIXI, Deepak, I would like to come to the internet governance as a overall, saying that internet governance is a process of decision making in internet space and also implementation of those decisions. And of course, the governance itself, whether it is internet governance or any governance, it helps in evaluation of the technology and use of that technology for the public. Let me tell you that Government of India is quite active in internet governance. And way back in 2015, if you remember, that there was an inter-ministerial group which had the Arun Shourie as the chair for that, and Ravi Shankar Prasad, who is the current minister, also part of it, and a lot of ministers were there. And if we remember that in 2018, when ICANN 57 was there, Ravi Shankar Prasad ji himself took a lot of interest in the whole process. So basically, government stand on internet governance is that multi-stakeholders approach. You know, what Rajat was talking is that, yes, we need everybody together, whether it is government or private or equipment manufacturing, the academia, the international organization, and to work together. You know, that is the stand which India has taken and represented, and now pushing its stand, which ICANN has not yet approved. But I think it is a very, very important step, which a democratic country like India or big player like India, as we have already crossed 750 million internet users in the country, I think that is a major step and policy taken, which is done by India. And another thing which is coming up very importantly is the national security. And of course, this has been kept, and traditionally it is required to be kept with the government alone. And government has already taken out the Information Technology Act long back, around 20 years back. And now we have brought the Cyber Security Act also. And shortly, for information on all of you, shortly the Data Center Act, Data Center policy is also expected to come from the government at as early as possible. MITI, Ministry of Electronic and IT, is becoming a nodal agency for implementation of all these recommendations on internet governance. Now, let me tell you that internet governance, the major thing is managing the critical infrastructure where NIXI comes into play. The critical infrastructure which is in the internet governance is the internet exchange or internet service providers, the TLD, that is CCTLD, GTLD or IDN, what you have spoken that India is leading in this. And also the National Internet Registry, which distribute and manage IPv4 and IPv6. And I don't know what is going to happen tomorrow when Huawei has brought the new internet protocol and it is being discussed at ITU level and maybe at ICANN level. Recently concluded ICANN 69 also had a reference of a Huawei thing, and which you mentioned to me, Deepak, if you remember it. And I think there is a lot of discussions going on. And lastly, which you said is the root servers, root server, which NIXI does it. So basically, with such a digital economy with 750 million internet users, NIXI has become a very important player in managing the resources which India has. I personally feel that today, although we have 750 million internet users, but a requirement of delivering a quality internet to the people is a utmost requirement today. Sometimes we have a variation in the speed delivered to the people. Sometimes, as we have seen with the Rajat, voice is not coming or video is not coming, or those kind of variations are really there, which has to be sorted out, and we have to ensure a quality delivery. Where IETF also comes into play, that we have to design the technology in such a way that these kind of irritations can be removed as early as possible. So friends, as far as NIXI is concerned, for internet exchange, we have 8 internet exchange in the country, which is serving the entire scope of the country, and no other internet exchange provider has such a wide variety of internet exchanges which are available with us. Now, we have large number of ISPs connected with us, and we understand that ISPs have their own limitations. Beside only providing the connectivity to the ISPs and CDNs, now NIXI is going slightly beyond that to ensure the quality of internet delivery to the people. We are thinking of offering a process through which we assess the network which is provided by ISPs on regular basis and provide them inputs for improvement in their network so that the ultimate speed and the quality of internet can be improved. We also plan to provide them additional facilities which they can provide to their consumers, like cloud computing, maybe the cross connect, and other facilities which they want to extend to their customers at the end. So NIXI is committed to invest in the whole process. And in fact, we are also looking in case we can open more internet exchanges more closer to the consumers by maybe in a B towns or C town category of the towns, and then providing a connectivity and all facilities through CDN, whichever is available to the metro city internet users and ISP providers. I hope this is going to be a requirement also, and this will overall change the whole concept of internet delivery to the consumers. Coming to the second aspect is about the TLDs. NIXI controls, or the government controls country code TLD, that is .IN I am happy to inform all my viewers that India is already 2.4 million .in users as on date. And if I compare the progress of NIXI in delivering .in domain, I think we are progressing much, much better than the similar digital economies which are available in the world today. And we are taking a lot of new steps, and we want to double up these numbers every year. That is the target which we have. And ultimately, if you see what is a country code is nothing but a digital address which everybody should have. And this thing has not gone in the mind of the people. So we are in fact giving a property to the people which they can own and keep with them for their whole life. Very interesting that a lot of NRIs, which are Indians who are staying outside the country, are adopting .in as their preferred domain, as well as a lot of vendors who are dealing with India. Either they are purchasing from India or they are selling from India. They are adopting now .in domain. Very interesting thing is that the gap between .in and .com is now closing very fast. And I hope we should be able to overtake .com also soon. Coming to the IDN TLD, I am proud to say that India is the largest IDN in the world. 22.
Mr. Jain, can I request you to please focus a little bit more on IPv6 because I'm also looking at watch on the clock.
So I'll come to directly to the NIR. I'll tell you that IPv6, we are proud that India adoption rate, I think, is the highest in the world, with around 72%, 72% IPv6 adoption in the world. And 6.6 billion IPv6 addresses are already distributed in the India. And the IPv4 is reducing a lot.
That's a good thing.
And right now, adoption, as I said, that there are a lot of problems in adoption, but I think it is important from 2-3 point of view. Number one, IPv4 is important from defense point of view, because security which IPv6 provide is not ensured as far as the encryption is concerned in IPv4. Second aspect which I am able to see, that digital payment, which is very important, picking up very fast after Digital India process in India. We are 100 million transactions per day, and this is a concern with everybody. So IPv6 is very, very important for those things also. Third most important is that India is now almost number one in mobile network and the wireless network. I think both the networks required IPv6 rather than IPv4 to provide a smooth and secure services, especially in VoIP. And what Rajat was talking is that now the world is turning on the video calls, right? Various kind of video calls are there.
Right now.
I think the security aspect in video call is there, and we know that Government of India has banned one particular video because of the security reason. So IPv6 is very, very important, but there are certain problems in adoption of IPv6. Number one, because Internet Protocol involve network, routers, billing system, software. So conversion from IPv4 to IPv6 is a costly affair. Okay, so people are comfortable with IPv4, so they don't want to shift to IPv6 so easily. So we have to motivate them to come to this level and adopt IPv6. A lot of examples are there, like one of the operator is already more than 95% in IPv6. So we hope that more and more people will do. But at the same time, we know we want education should be more spread in IPv6. Capacity building should be there. So what NIXI has decided, number one is that we are building up a lot of videos to educate the people, and we are building up a certificate course through which people can go through the certificate course, understand IPv6, and then become employable also. They can spread IPv6 proliferation in the country. Number two, we are starting a NIXI portal. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll come back to probably some of these later. Okay. Because I'm also having a watch on the clock.
Okay.
So Dheeraj, I want to shift to you now. So you've been in the IPv6 much before a lot of people came even on the internet. And as Mr. Jain just mentioned that, okay, there are these inertia, so one is a lot of people might come to IPv6 because of convenience. Some people might come because of compulsion, but very few people might come out of conviction of their own. So how have been your experience in this space many, many years back when you used to do these workshops for ministry, as he just mentioned? And also, very importantly, how do you see the role of Indian technical community? And when I'm saying Indian technical community, specifically from the perspective of those people who are in the academia, who are in the Indian research community, and not necessarily working in MNCs, etc., participation of theirs in the global standard development space. So these two questions in particular.
Sure. Thanks, Deepak. So yeah, I have been kind of into IPv6 before IPv6 was standardized. When we had these working groups, PIP and SIP and IPv4, stuff like that. We were the first one in the world to have a Linux implementation of IPv6 in our lab. Now, my feeling is that we did a lot of this evangelism in the years 2002, 2006. There's 5-6 years. I personally would have visited at least 100 colleges and maybe 30-40 organizations, gave tutorials in at least 10 conferences. And I know people in IISc Bangalore were doing something similar, and BITS Pilani were doing similar stuff. I think looking back, and then suddenly I saw that after 2006, somehow there was no discussion on IPv6 for a few years. Somehow it just people felt that maybe it is just another protocol which is going to, which comes and goes, and it's not going to become popular and it's never going to be implemented. Right? So my feeling, looking back, is maybe we were just evangelizing a technology a little too early. If what we did in 2000 to 2006, if we had done in the last 5-6 years or last 10 years, maybe the adoption would have been far more, and so on. Also, I think in terms of capacity building, we always just focused on tutorials, this 1 hour, 3 hours, 6 hours kind of tutorials all over the place. But I think we should have probably focused more on every college teaching IPv6. IPv6 is still, if you look at a basic networks course in most of the engineering colleges, IPv6 is not taught even today. When I teach IPv6 in IIT Kanpur, I tell them, look, by the time you graduate, IPv4 may be less than 50%. So, you should better learn this, right? But that's not happening very commonly across the country. So I think there is something to be done with the educational institutions for capacity building. Certainly, you need to have more, IPv6 being part of the basic networks course, which almost every computer science student is doing in this country. Also, the research part, I know whenever I've been to DATI and said, I want some money for IPv6, they will say, you organize any conference, any workshop, any tutorial, we will fund it. But I say, no, I also need to set up a V6 lab, for example. And that is, when V6 comes up, we will look at it at that time. So I think research funding also is slightly less. Okay. Another thing that has happened is that our role in standardization has been very low. It's only in the last 5-6 years. In fact, I remember when I came to India in '93, I had written an internet draft for something in IPv6. I couldn't go to IETF meetings to just even discuss that. And unless you went and talked to people and convinced them that you have a good idea, it won't be accepted as part of the standard. There was no way any professor of any IIT could find money to go to IETF meeting, because the requirement was that it should be a conference in which there should be a peer-reviewed paper and you should be submitting the paper. Right? Today, of course, NIXI supports students to go to IETF meeting. And we are much better off. now, but standardization, we had absolutely no role to play for the first, till 2010 or so. So that is, I think also, see, when people go to IETF, it's not just standardization. I mean, just meet so many people, you get convinced of their ideas, come back, with a lot of new ideas for your own students and your own research. So that's another thing that country should have done, but now at least it's doing. The other thing that we have never kind of communicated to people is how easy it is to migrate to V6. Okay? I'll tell you one story. In 2004, and I'm really talking about long back, right? We said, let's do IPv6 in IIT Kanpur. Okay? So how do we do this? So we used to have very little bandwidth in those days, a lot of restrictions. You can only download maybe whatever 10 MB per day or something like that. So we said, okay, we are going to have one HTTP proxy, which from the ITK side can only be connected on IPv6. Right? So I was the head computer center and I sent an email to all students evening 6 o'clock saying, look, we have created this proxy, and on this proxy, there is no bandwidth limit. You can download it. Okay. And we didn't tell them how to switch to IPv6. We didn't tell them anything. We just said, this is on IPv6. Right? Within 1 hour, it was like crazily congested. Right? Now you can imagine these are students, not even computer science students, right? I mean, computer science was a very small, tiny portion of the student body, right? So people could just ask around, install IPv6 and make use of this proxy within an hour, right? That's how easy it is. But, you talk to somebody in the company and he's going to say, no, I don't know, it's very, or whatever, right? And in fact, we had also, I'll like talk about an experience with BSNL, Anil, you were there. So I think it was 2011 when BSNL hired IIT Kanpur as a consultant to say what all will need to change if they were to move to IPv6. And we sat down with a lot of the people who visited a lot of this thing, saw all their, what kind of routers they have, what kind of other equipment they have, what kind of customer premise equipment you have. And we gave a report where we essentially said that I think almost like 99% of your equipment is IPv6 ready. Okay. And we said you could immediately at least start providing, ISP service to an organization like IIT Kanpur, and we were willing to be the first customer in India, right? And we also saw that it's not going to, as long as you're just providing ISP services, it's not very expensive, and BSNL was making a lot of money in those days. It doesn't make much money today, right? And for whatever reason, BSNL said, oh, it's too difficult, right? So I think somehow we have this mental block that it is too difficult. When somebody who has never read about networks can figure out how to run IPv6 in a few minutes, and there are these experts who are saying it's too difficult. So we haven't communicated well enough. And in academia, I think this capacity building or communicating that it is actually an easy technology to use, that I think has been a failure of academia. And I'm part of academia is responsible for it. So I think that's pretty much all that I would like to say right now. And if there are any questions, I will take it up.
Thanks, Dheeraj. So this is very interesting that you did mention about 2004. Now, interestingly, in 2004 May, when the then communications and IT minister took the oath and assumed the office on 26th of May, he actually had a 10-point agenda. And one of those 10 points was that India will migrate, and I'm telling migrate, to IPv6 by 2006. So I'm not really surprised that you did see a lot of momentum and support between 2002 and 2006, but very little after that. But I think in the past few years, again, of course, it has probably more out of compulsion than by conviction. Things are happening now much better way. And of course, the footprint is also expanding a lot. And of course, I think there have been other improvements as well. On the other hand, if you see, I think this is a very important point that you mentioned, that what type of incentives, and Rajat being an economist, so there's this whole thing around behavioral economics, which are around nudging and other things for which people have also got Nobel Prize for that matter. So how you can nudge? So one is obviously you can come out with a dictate that, okay, you have to move to IPv6, etc. But the other thing could be something like what Dheeraj mentioned, that, okay, come to this type of this proxy server, and there's no bandwidth limitation. So that could act as a huge incentive for people to be nudged towards going towards IPv6, and that way in a very quick adoption in that sense. So let me move to Glenn now. So Glenn, you've been to India so many times, and you've observed things about internet governance that Mr. Jain mentioned earlier. You've been globally involved in many of these type of things, not just in India, obviously in Canada, but also in elsewhere also at global level, including at Internet Society. So how have you seen India's participation in these type of platforms? For example, he mentioned about multi-stakeholder engagement. So both in terms of, I'll say, not so much only in terms of number of people, but more importantly in terms of the quality of participation, in terms of the commitment and continuity, consistency, etc. And second thing I wanted to ask you is about what are the best practices that India should look at elsewhere? But more importantly, are there any best practices that you have seen in India which are worthy of emulation and export from here? So Glenn.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much to the committee for welcoming me to the session today. Yeah, this is a very lengthy answer, but I'll have to be as succinct as possible due to time. But my experience working in India goes back at least 20 years. I started doing work, and some of you shared your experience back to 1996 working with Linux. I was working with the Linux Professional Institute at the time, and we did a number of site visits, particularly to the schools and government, to promote capacity building around the kernel. So we were in New Delhi, Hyderabad, Trivandrum, Chennai, Mumbai, Vizag, and Bangalore, all of which were very interesting because we had a chance to be able to sit down at Wipro with the senior executives at Tata and elsewhere, and we're basically we're very, very focused on capacity building with regards to Linux. They were very generous in terms of their time and interest. And did we progress very far? Probably not that far, like anything else. We've seen very little change in terms of adoption of Linux, besides the domination by Windows. But if you look outside the end user experience, Linux is everywhere. We see it in every which way we turn. Linux has proven to be a huge success story. But in terms of capacity building and work, as I said, I started my work in various different cities in India over 20 years ago, but it's gone many other experiences working with organizations such as ICANN, since we mentioned the multi-stakeholder model with ICANN. And at least 2 ICANN meetings have been in India, if not more. My work with IEEE, and I actually just forgot about the Internet Initiative that I was on with Deepak. But also particularly ISOC and my involvement with the Indian School of Internet Governance, all of which provide different audiences, different messages, but everything is still the same in terms of a core message. And the message is, how do we get people in their careers, thinking of getting involved? How can we ignite interest from a policy point of view to get, a change of attitude? But I think things are changing. I think in looking back in 20 years, I think we're seeing more and more evidence of Indians being involved in many capacities. But, there's still some serious gaps I'm seeing as a member of the ICANN NOMCOM last year and as well as this year. Amrita, who's from New Delhi, she's on the committee as well. But I could tell you there's very few applications to the ICANN board or to PTI or the other boards. So for example, the nomination is opening up again for this year. I strongly recommend people to apply, not just for the board, PTI, ALAC, or GNSO, or CCNSO. All of those constituencies within ICANN can have a great opportunity. Also, being a former chair of the ISOC NOMCOM, again, very few applications. So
Glenn, I cannot hear you.
Yeah, Glenn, it seems
we lost your audio.
Are you muted? No, he's not muted.
No,
Glenn,
I think he lost.
Yeah. Hi, Glenn. We just heard up to the place where you mentioned about being the chair of NOMCOM at ICANN. Can you please repeat?
We are still not able to hear Glenn.
Yeah.
Deepak, I suggest you move on and then come back to Glenn, just to save time.
All right. Okay. So, Dhruv, can just send a message to Glenn?
Yes,
and,
I'll do that.
Yeah. Okay. So
I'll do that.
Okay. So let me just quickly now come to, because although I've requested the organizers to extend a little bit, about 10 minutes for us. So I would just request all of you to speak very briefly about one specific opportunity that you see in terms of internet in the next 4 or 5 years in India, and one specific challenge. So not too long, but to each of you, I would just request you to please limit to one specific challenge and one specific opportunity. So let me start perhaps in the reverse order this time. Maybe start with Dheeraj right now. Yeah, Dheeraj, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry about that. My PC knocked off, so I'm on the phone right now.
Okay.
I think the big thing that's going to happen in terms of more and more people using internet is the e-commerce thing. And pretty much everybody you think about, Geo, for example, is going to get big in that. You need reliable internet, you need secure internet, and so me, that's the next big application where pretty much everybody, even the rural areas, are going to connect to internet for that purpose. The challenge is really going to be, how do you provide that service in remote areas, right? So Geo is of course claiming that they're going to cover 99% of Indian area with their 5G and whatever. So let's see if they're able to do that. But I think that's going to be the challenge.
Okay. So Rajat.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me build on what Dheeraj has just said in terms of the opportunity. I think the opportunity in India is to just get everybody on the internet. There is so much of sort of pent-up demand, and there's so much of the addressable market that still exists. I think the opportunity is to get everybody on board, and it's going to be a sort of, while it's an opportunity. And let me also just say very briefly, Deepak, if you permit me, that once that sort of critical mass is achieved that I've been talking about, interoperable, standardized critical mass, then the impacts on the economy will turn out to be humongous. They will turn out to be very, very profound. So that's the opportunity in India, the sort of addressable market. I think the challenge, there are multifarious challenges, and I'd like to just say the challenge to my mind would be to try and determine what's the best way to be able to develop the supply side in terms of fiberization, complementing it with spectrum, etc., just to get fiber and complementary infrastructure, be it spectrum, be it micro links, etc. All that that infrastructure in the ground or in the air, so that opportunity can be leveraged. And the reason I think this is a challenge is because since 2011, we've been talking about the fiberization of the Gram Panchayats in India, and still today, until today, we haven't been able to complete it. So I think we should complete that on a mission mode, recognize there are multiple technologies that enable us to do that, and then we can build on that infrastructure in terms of delivery of services.
Thanks, Rajat. And Anil, so when you're looking at these type of issues, as Dheeraj mentioned, in terms of huge opportunity for e-commerce, or Rajat is saying in terms of supply side, infrastructure, etc. So how do you see the role of things which offer more security, more safety, more privacy, more trust, and reliability and resilience in these type of systems? Because if the experience of the users is not that great, they might come soon, but they might go off sooner in that sense. So how do you see these things evolving in terms of both opportunity and challenge? Yeah.
Thank you, Deepak. I agree with both the panelists that, yeah, there are opportunities which they have sought about e-commerce and then adopting more and more people about the internet. But I personally feel that the current opportunity which we are able to see because of pandemic was the adoption of video on internet. Schools are now learning on digital. Offices have become a distance offices, and I think we at home also are working digital. So this is a great opportunity which India has seen, and it is a latent thing which we have seen that what was not possible initially, now it is becoming a possible. But the concern which Deepak, you have said very clearly is the security. And security is one of the major aspect of internet governance today. Now, let me tell you that the major thing in the security are, number one is the DNS, and number two is the domain. So we need a DNS which is easily accessible to everybody, and at the same time it is well controlled, so that we can do a lot of activities on DNS. And second is the domain, and domain should be a domain which should be, we should make all digital economy keep on working if there is a block because of any reason from the word outside. And the third most important is the root server, which is not in control of us today. But definitely, let me inform all the panelists that we are working seriously, that in case anything happens like this, which I am talking and hinting, then Indian digital economy will continue to work. So a lot of work are going on in digital cyberspace, and Cyber Act has come, and we hope that we should be able to provide a secure internet uses to the Indians. And a lot of discussions are going on about the data privacy and data sovereignty. I think these are another concern area which is a matter of discussion today, and hopefully tomorrow we should be able to resolve all these issues also. Deepak, thank you.
Thank you. And Glenn, I guess now we can hear you. Can you just test your mic, please? Yeah,
yes,
Glenn. Yeah,
I'm here.
So the last that we heard was that you were mentioning that as a former chair of Nomcom, so that's where we sort of lost your video. So just wanted to mention that to you. So if you could complete that quickly. And now, although we have requested Dhruv to sort of give us a little bit of extension, but just want you to quickly wrap up on that. And after that, the other thing I wanted to ask you in the last, and which I want you to sort of address together in a sequence, is this. What is the single biggest opportunity that you see in India in the next 4 or 5 years for internet? And what is the single biggest challenge that you see in India?
Sure. Great, thank you. And I apologize what happened to the mic. I have no idea why that happened. As I was saying, and it looks like I jumped at the right moment, because as I said, I think there's, and it links back to the last part you were saying, is the lack of awareness in applications that I'm seeing at different organizations. And that's a problem, because from looking at what other efforts that have been done with other organizations and different geolocations in the world, I think the Indian applications are low, and I'm not sure why that's the case, but I think we have representation with two people, the secretary and chair for AP Rello are from India, and I don't see why we are not seeing applications for the board and elsewhere. So that's something that needs to be done. But let me talk about some of the good things that are happening. NSIG has been a huge success, 5 years in India, and I think they've done a good job in helping bringing internet governance to the wider community. They have a WhatsApp group. There has been active participation. Pandrit Kaur was involved with, and she's with this group as well. Very active member, and others. Aita was one of our students that was job shadowing our School of Internet Governance. She's done a great job with the IGF youth in India. There is Adhar Umesh and Prajit Gupta also have started the rural SIG with ISOC. Again, huge success, but these are grassroots organizations that are making an impact. And I think that's important. And the other thing I have to do a call out on universal acceptance is Dr. AJ Dada. He's with the UA steering group, and he's assisted from an Indian local initiative is Sarika Gulyani. So there's been some, because the internationalization of domain names and the whole use of work is absolutely critical in terms of making, and this is the challenge too, is a non-English internet. And as we move, and as the challenge going into the next 5 years, is mobile is where the action is going to be, and it's not going to be English. And this is the largest growth market. And so some of the stuff that's going to be interesting, it's a disruptive technology. We're going to see e-money, mobile money as a major factor. We're going to see AI, artificial intelligence for good as a factor. Online learning or digital literacy is a critical thing. E-government, as all of this. At the same time, we have some negative things in terms of privacy issues, manipulation, fake news, all of which is a huge challenge. But look at the success that DJ mentioned earlier on about IPv6. It's well known. India has been hugely successful in IPv6 migration. No other country has come close to it. And this is an interesting thing that where can India share their successes, and how can India share some of these best practices that other countries who've been laggards that have not adopted as quickly as what India has done. And this is important to share. Now, I don't see some of the best practices of some organized, like the Dutch have created something like the Global Cyber Expert Alliance, that GCFE. Yes. That's a very important thing to look at duplicating something like what the Dutch has done is something that I strongly recommend in the next 5 years, that get on board with that, create their own version of that. And I think that's all I need to say right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. And with this, we would just like to sort of conclude this session. So for me, I've taken sort of 5 different, I'll say, takeaways. So one is obviously we need to look at greater participation, but also understanding about the whole institutional framework. There are different, I'll say, alphabetical soups around NOMCOM and ELAC and so many other things, not just within ICANN, but elsewhere also. Obviously, we also need to have better participation at standards bodies, as Dheeraj mentioned, in terms of IETF, etc. And then security is safety, language inclusion. And as Rajat had mentioned right in the beginning, in terms of video being a major sort of opportunity also there. And as Mr. Jain also mentioned about video itself coming in a big way. And when we are looking at video, one of the important things that I would say is more from the architectural perspective is this, that originally the web was, when the internet started, it was all symmetric. And then with the whole proliferation of websites, it became highly asymmetric, that okay, download speeds will be much higher, upload speed will be much lower. Even today, of course, there's a lot of streaming video and other stuff, but at the same time, there's also interactive video. For example, right now, the way we are doing, and this type of interaction requires much more symmetric design rather than asymmetric design in terms of upload and download speeds. So that could be one thought, that how you can empower users to sort of do these type of maneuvering on the fly. So for example, if I were doing streaming video at this point of time, I would just require maybe 1:100. But if I'm doing something like this, I would require 1:1. So what type of maneuvering can be allowed or can be enabled on that sense? And the other thing was in terms of the government should look at this whole digital economy not so much as a direct cash cow, but more in terms of other enablement. And the last thing that comes to my mind is I'm reminded of Alvin Toffler's book, Future Shock, where he had come out with this concept of prosumers. He said that in future, people will not only be consumers, that is, they won't be only passive users of something, but they'll actually be prosumers, so they'll be producing as well as consuming. So with that, I would just like to wrap up the session and over to Nalini.
Thank you so much, Deepak. This is just really great. I'm going to say two short things and turn it over to Sridhar. We have a great amount of food for thought. We are actually in touch with some of the folks in Africa. See thinks about that later. We're also discussing starting an IPv6 expert deployment group. But with that, I want to learn all about 5G. So much to do. Sridhar, next slide, please. This is very, very interesting. Sridhar has been active in some of the hardware and infrastructure related groups, such as 3GPP, SAT, CT4, and so forth. He's currently a senior product manager at Altio Star, and what he's going to talk about is how 5G affects the IP engineer, which is what most of us on the call are. So we've heard so much about it, but let's hear about what we can actually, what we need to know. So Sridhar, over to you, please.
Thanks, ISOC and IETF for this opportunity, and good morning, good evening, everyone. So let me start presenting my slide.
Great. And if I might ask for others to go ahead and mute themselves and maybe turn off video so that we can focus on Sridhar, that would be wonderful.
I hope everyone is able to see my slides.
Yes, Sridhar.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, sure.
Can you make it full screen? Presentation mode?
Yeah,
Thank you.
Is it visible now in full screen?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. So, yeah, 5G, as you know, in general, the standardization of 5G happens in the 3GPP body, and prior to that, LTE and 4G has also been handled by the 3GPP standards body. And I had been working with 3GPP standards for close to 8 years now. So for an IP engineer, when they look at the mobile internet technology, be it 4G or 5G, once the packet hits the gateways in the cellular operator, what happens after that remains a black box. So this tutorial is an attempt to look deeper into that network, the cellular network, and how the packet gets routed inside a cellular network till the point it reaches your mobile phone, right? So in the context of that, I'll be first touching upon the high-level architecture of 5G, system architecture aspects, and then I'll be digging into some of the use cases that are enabled by 5G, and specifically I will also dig a little bit into the radio access network, how the radio access network itself has evolved in 5G. Then we'll come to the meat of this presentation, where I will get into the life of a packet in a 5G network, both in the downlink direction as well as in the uplink direction. And we'll look at some of the network topologies, specifically related to slicing and private 5G. So private 5G is another interesting use case that is coming up in the 5G networks. And towards the end of this tutorial, I will debunk some of the myths that are being floating around the world related to 5G. And finally, we'll look at the role of IETF in 5G. So that said, so as you can see, the high-level architecture of a 5G network. So so if you talk about 5G, people talk in two flavors. They call something as a non-standalone network and a standalone network. So what a non-standalone network means is you use the existing 4G network, LTE network as the base and add 5G base stations as secondary access. So your core network and the IP routing part and the signaling in the core network remains the same as 4G network. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the standalone network where end-to-end you have a new architecture in place defined by 3GPP. So if you look at the architecture defined, so the bottom part in this figure is what we are going to predominantly concentrate in this tutorial. So that's where the IP routing happens. So that is what is going to carry the internet traffic between your mobile phone and whatever applications that you are using. And all the green items that you see on the top, those are the signaling plane entities which 3GPP has defined in order to set up your session and to carry and to set up the tunnels for carrying the traffic. We will not be digging deeper into these signaling aspect. So those are 3GPP specific protocol. That's not important for an IP engineer as such. I will dig more into the lower part. Specifically to understand the key difference in the 5G signaling architecture, all these green boxes are now RESTful API based. So this has allowed evolving new use cases in the 5G network in a rapid fashion since the APIs are well defined, and 3GPP also is releasing these APIs in as a formal specification using Open API specification. And this allows anybody to take that specification and build these applications, signaling plane applications that set up the routing path in the network. And these are some of the key aspects of that. REST API, as I said, is used, and the element NRF that you see here is a service registry and a repository which holds registration of every API in this network. And APIs are discovered in a authorized manner using OAuth 2.0 protocol. And as I said, APIs are defined using a formal specification. Now, coming to see the difference between the LTE packet core network and the 5G core network and how it has evolved. So during the LTE days, you had these elements that you see on the left-hand side of the screen. And between each element, you had point-to-point protocols. So for example, between S-Gateway and MME, they used this GTP control plane protocol for signaling. Whereas between MME and the HSS, which is holding the subscriber database, it was using diameter. So they use different protocol for different purposes. And in order to build a network, the operators had to depend on specialist vendors who had expertise in these specific areas, and they built the network. Now coming to 5G, 3GPP removed all these different protocols and they unified it through REST APIs. So as long as the formal specification is complied to, anybody can take that spec and build these core network elements using the REST API. Now, looking at the bottom part, the radio access network itself evolved in 5G into these disaggregated components. So 3GPP disaggregated the RAN into something called a centralized unit and a distributed unit. And the centralized unit CU itself is split into a control plane part and a data plane part. So data plane is called the user plane in 3GPP terminology. And then after 3GPP, there was another standards alliance called ORAN Alliance. which split the distributed unit part further into a DU and a radio unit. So these radio units are dumb boxes which are just going to have an antenna and the lower layer of the physical layer in the radio processing. Bulk of the algorithms and the upper part of the physical layer processing and the scheduling happens in the distributed unit, which allows you to place the distributed unit anywhere in the network. It also allows you to cloud-based radio access network. I will come into that in the subsequent slides. So that's the architectural evolution from the radio access network part. Now, as I mentioned, the Open RAN Alliance or the ORAN Alliance had split the radio access network, which I showed in the previous slide, this red box, into this set of architectural components. So you have this radio unit, which is called ORU. O stands for the ORAN Alliance. And you have this distributed unit, which is running the upper part of the physical layer and the scheduling algorithms. And then you have the centralized unit, which is going to run your upper layers of the radio protocol stack. And they have defined the standard interface between each of these elements. And the other key part ORAN has defined is this RAN intelligent controller. So each of these elements, they expose a lot of information, real-time information through this E2 interface with this RAN intelligent controller. And you can build niche applications to control the RAN and as well as change scheduling policies or experiment with the radio resource usage by building applications in the RAN intelligent controller. So this sort of opens out the avenues for the operator to experiment in the network, this architecture. And myself coming from Altiostar Network, we are predominantly a RAN vendor focused on this disaggregated and open RAN architecture. So as I mentioned, so this sort of disaggregation in the radio access network allows you to build the radio access network such that you get the RU from one vendor. The DU itself can be built on top of commercially available hardware like data center grade servers, where you can put a general purpose processor, you can put a timing and synchronization card as a PCIe form factor NIC card, you can have a accelerator for the fronthaul and some of the lower layer physical layer processing algorithms in the form of an FPGA card. And then on top of it, you have these operating systems and your MAC scheduler and RLC running on top of a general purpose processor. Then the higher layers, you have the PDCP and RRC running in a centralized unit, which again can run on top of a general purpose processor. And you could virtualize both the distributed unit and the centralized unit in a data center, and you can build edge data centers. So essentially your 5G radio access network, when deployed, at the cell side, you will only have the radio unit, which is just a box and the antenna sitting there, and you save a lot of real estate space due to that. The rest of the processing gets moved to an edge data center, and the higher layer processing can get moved to a centralized data center. Now, so as I mentioned, this sort of an architecture allows you to disaggregate everything and allows vendors who are specializing in specific areas to come out with niche products. The key to make this sort of an architecture successful is to build and be part of a diversified ecosystem and work with the different vendors, work with the system integrator who takes all these components and builds a solution to an operator. And of course, in order to get these interfaces standardized, presence in ORAN is also important. And the role of a solution architect also becomes pretty important here. So depending on the operator requirements, one can take these components and build a solution out of it. So that's largely about how this architecture as such evolved from 4G to 5G. Now let's get into the crux of this presentation, where I'll go into the life of a packet. So before we get into the life of a packet, it's important to understand some of the terminologies. So whenever you hear the term 5GC, it refers to the 5G core network, which comprises the AMF, SMF, UPF I showed in the previous slide. And the DN stands for a data network. So this is nothing but your internet or any edge application network that the mobile phone is talking to. The DNN is nothing but a name for the data network that your mobile phone is connecting to. So typical names could be internet or IMS. IMS is used for your voice call, VoLTE. So if you take, for example, edge application like a stadium live application. So you are sitting in a stadium and the stadium owner is providing live content streamed from an edge data center hosted near the stadium. So that application could be identified by this name, say Stadium Live. And then for every data network, the mobile phone sets up a PDU session. So the mobile phone is called a UE in 3GPP terminology. UE stands for user equipment. And the PDU session is the one which is going to anchor the IP connectivity in the operator's network. So the gateway that is going to terminate the IP routing from the internet to the operator's network is called the user plane function, UPF. And of course, 5G enables this concept of network slicing, which I'll get to in a bit. The network slicing is identified by an identifier called NSSAI. It's called Specific Network Slice Selection Assistance Information. So using this, when the user is setting up IP session, you know through which slice the packet has to be routed. So coming to some of the use cases enabled by this architecture, the first use case, I call it as multi-persona UE. So let's take the case of UE or say a tablet sort of a device in a factory floor. So from that device, you could access internet, and at the same time, you could be accessing some of the machines on the factory floor and doing some sort of robotic control. So these two could be viewed as two separate networks from that iPad device, right? So these two networks have to go through different slices of traffic. So you have to segregate the traffic and isolate the routing between these two networks. So 5G allows you to do that. From one UE, you can have the traffic routed to different networks from the radio network onwards. So as you can see here, each colored item is a separate slice. The pink one is a separate slice, the maroon one is a separate slice, and the green one is a separate slice. And for each slice, there is a separate UPF. There could be a separate SMF, which is setting up the session in the UPF. So that is one sort of a use case. The second use case is like the UE could be connected to a single slice only, but it could be accessing different applications in that slice. For example, UE could be connected to an internet traffic, but within internet, some applications might demand very low latency, and hence those applications have to be hosted in an edge data center, and some applications may not be latency sensitive. So in such cases, you have to break out some of these latency sensitive traffic to an edge data center. So 5G has this concept of flow-based splitting. So you have this UPF element itself is split into an uplink classifier and a PDU session anchor UPF. So this uplink classifier UPF, what it does is based on the packet routed from the user equipment, it looks at the destination IP address of the traffic, and based on the destination IP address and the protocol used, it splits the traffic to a local data center. For example, if you are accessing an AR based content or AR gaming, the signature of that packet will be identified by this, and it will be split to a edge data center that is serving information related to the AR application. So this is destination IP based splitting. On the contrary, there is a source IP based splitting, which is handled by this concept called branching point UPF. So what this allows is you can have a multi-homed IPv6 session. So when the UE sets up IP connectivity, based on the application characteristic, it can set up a socket through these address type parameters, either as non-persistent or graceful replacement IPv6 or a fixed IPv6 address. So this socket descriptor has been enabled by this new RFC that has come in IETF, and this is a significant contribution of IETF to 5G. So based on the socket descriptor, the socket layer translates that into the lower level signaling in the 3GPP. In 3GPP, we have this concept of session and service continuity mode 1, 2, and 3. And each of these socket types maps to the specific SSE mode. For example, if the application requires seamless connectivity and at the same time it requires very low latency packet routing, every time it moves, the application context also has to be hosted on a local data center. So as it keeps moving, its IP address could be changing, but its session should not terminate. So this concept of multi-homed IPv6 helps in that, wherein before a UE breaks the previous IP connection, another IPv6 address is provided to the UE through the IPv6 routing advertisement procedures. And once the new IPv6 address is active, the old address can be gracefully removed from this network. So this allows you to sort of make before break relocation of the anchor. And this branching point UPF, based on the source IP address, when the UE is using this multi-homed IPv6 address, it branches out the traffic. So when the UE is given two IP addresses for the same session, one of the IP address, if it is used as a source IP address, it will route to the central anchor, whereas the other IP address it is using, it could route to a edge anchor and get the application content from there. So the key difference between the use case 2 and use case 3 is 2 is based on destination IP address splitting, while the 3 is based on a source IP address based splitting. Now let's get into the life of a packet in the downlink direction. So what do I mean by downlink direction? Any traffic that is coming into your mobile phone is called a downlink traffic. So let's take the case of an IP data coming from a data network, say an application server sitting somewhere in the internet. The source IP of that packet will be the IP of the application service, while the destination IP of that packet will be IP of the UE. So that hits this UPF. UPF is going to be the IP gateway of the cellular network. So this is where the role of IP engineer typically stops. Then thereafter, everything that happens from step 2 onwards is within a cellular network. So let's see how this IP packet travels in the cellular network. So this cyan part that you see at the top gets encapsulated into a GTP tunnel by this UPF. So all these blue items that you see on top of the cyan part in step 2 are the additional overheads or the tunneling overheads inserted by this UPF. And in the GTPU header, there is an extension header called PDU session container. And in that, the UPF marks a specific QoS flow. So one might ask, why is this needed when IP itself has the DSCP marking? So what DSCP marking enables is it allows flow classification and prioritization in the IP routers between the UPF and say the G-Node BCU UP, which sits in the RAN network. But it does not allow to classify or apply specific radio prioritization or the radio bearer control in the G-Node Bs. At the radio network level, the QFI marking is used to map to a specific radio bearer. So that is why this marking is carried in this GTPU extension header. And once this packet hits this G-Node BCU UP, from here onwards, the radio protocol takes control. So in the radio layer, we have these protocols called SDAP and the PDCP. So PDCP uses ciphering between the G-Node BCU UP and UE. So the content of the PDCP will be ciphered from here onwards. Hence, the IP packet towards the UE gets ciphered by the PDCP layer, and the PDCP layer overhead identifies which radio bearer it belongs to, and that is put into yet another GTP tunnel here, and it goes to the G-Node B DU, and in the DU, based on the QFI marking, it will apply the specific scheduling policy, and it will provide grants to the UE in the downlink direction to send the packet. Once the grant is provided to the UE, the packet will be put into the RLC and the MAC layer, and based on the scheduling, the physical layer, at the physical layer, these MAC layer packets will be mapped to the IQ constellation points in the frequency domain of the spectrum. So once, so if you look at the radio layer or the radio frequency spectrum, you can think of the resources in frequency domain and time domain. So the radio resource is split into a grid where it is split into number of subcarriers in the frequency domain and number of symbols in the time domain. So you essentially map your bits into some constellation points in that grid, and those constellation points are called IQ samples. So depending on whether you are using 64 QAM modulation or 256 QAM modulation in the radio layer, it will map to those many points in the IQ constellation. So those points are what is carried in the fronthaul interface between the DU and the RU. So here what you are essentially carrying is the mapping of your IP packet to a constellation point in the grid. And since the entire bandwidth constellation mapping is carried here as IQ samples, the bandwidth requirement on the fronthaul is pretty huge. Let's say on this interface, the incoming bandwidth, aggregate bandwidth to cell site is say 1 Gbps, while on this interface, this could extrapolate to say 15 Gbps. So that's because at the lower layer, you map to a lot of bits in the IQ sample. And once the radio unit receives the IQ sample, all it does is it takes the inverse fast Fourier transform and maps it to a waveform on the radio and sends it to the UE. And once the UE gets it, the IP packet as it was encapsulated here will be decapsulated, and it gets the packet here. So this is what happens in a cellular network after this IP packet hits the UPF. So there are multiple stages it goes through in the downlink direction. Coming to the uplink direction, let's take the specific case of splitting of traffic in a uplink classifier UPF, which we saw in the earlier slide. So splitting of traffic towards an edge application. It's similar form of packet forwarding, but in the reverse direction as seen in the previous slide. For the uplink communication from the UE to the radio unit, a priori the DU should have provided uplink grants to the UE. So that should have been carried in a previous downlink radio control channel to the UE. Once the grant is provided, the UE will send the uplink packet in this specified slot and time interval. And when the packet reaches the radio unit, it will again put it into PDC, it will put into the GDPU tunnel towards the G-Node B DU, and the GW DU will send it to the UP, and UP will decapsulate this packet and put it into this GDPU tunnel towards the UPF. Now what happens at the UPF is the interesting part here. As I said, uplink classifier UPF looks at this destination IP address in this cyan part of the packet, and it sees, okay, this destination IP address is for a edge application. Since it is for an edge application, this will route it to a local, instead of routing to a anchor UPF, it will route it to a edge data network here. And the application server will handle that packet. Now, after the application server gets that packet, the reverse traffic has to flow back. Now, that is where another interesting thing happens, which we'll see in the next slide. Now, when the reverse traffic has to happen, the edge application puts the destination IP address as the IP address of the UE. But this IP address of the UE is actually kind of anchored at this PDU session anchor UPF, because this UPF serves as the anchor point for that IP. So when the packet is put into an IP network, since this UPF acts as the default gateway for this destination IP address, the packet will get routed here instead of going directly to the ULCL UPF, uplink classifier UPF. So here you can see a sort of an asymmetry between the uplink direction and downlink direction. So how to avoid this asymmetry? One way is to set a tunnel between the edge application and the uplink classifier UPF and route all the downlink traffic through the tunnel instead of doing just plain IP routing. If you put a plain IP routing, this sort of asymmetry might happen. But this is an interesting problem to solve in the IP network. I'm just highlighting this. Tunneling is one way. There could be other ways. You could use an SDN network to sort of change the routing policy for this specific destination IP. That is another way. It's an interesting problem to look in the IETF or the IP world. Now, getting specifically into the RAN area. So as I explained earlier, the packets get encapsulated into the GTP tunnel, and inside the GTP tunnel you have the SDAP and the PDCP layers put up. So the SDAP plays a role in a standalone network, whereas in a non-standalone network where the anchor is an LTE carrier, you do not have the SDAP, it's only PDCP. Now, what happens inside a CUUP is when the downlink packet hits the CUUP, it will use the downlink GTPU tunnel ID and the QFI marking on the tunnel to look up a rule to see to which bearer, radio bearer, this needs to be mapped into. Depending on the identified radio bearer, it will apply the corresponding SDAP configuration and the PDCP configuration. And then it will encapsulate that SDAP and PDCP packet into a GTPU tunnel. What does the PDCP configuration tell for that bearer? It will identify the specific ciphering key. As I said, the PDCP, one of the important role of PDCP is to do ciphering between the UP and the UE, and each UE might have a different ciphering key. So based on the identified PDCP context, the ciphering happens and it is encapsulated into a GTPU tunnel. And if you look at the structure of the GTPU tunnel itself, the outer IP could be IPv4 or V6, which could be say 20 or 40 octets, depending on this V4 or V6. And then you have an 8-octet UDP, you have a 12-octet GDP header, and then you have an extension header, which could be N octets, depending on the fields that you set here. And then comes the SDAP and the PDCP layer. The key part to note is the QFI, which identifies the QoS flow, will be the first octet in the SDAP layer. That allows the DU to directly look up at the first octet of this header and apply the right scheduling policy. So the packet forwarding can be put in the fast path here. And then there could be IPsec employed in these interfaces between the DU and the CUUP, and also between the CUUP and the UPF. So if you are using IPsec, this whole GTPU tunnel gets encapsulated into an outer IPsec. So when you have IPsec tunnel here, you have 3 layers of IP traffic: an outer IP address for the IPsec, and again a middle IP address for the GTPU tunnel, and then an inner IP for the eventual packet that is sent to the UE. So there are 3 layers of IP here. Now let's get into some interesting use cases and topologies for this network slicing. I'm not going to get into the signaling aspects of how these slices are set up for the UE. That is beyond scope of this presentation. But let's assume that somehow for a UE, multiple slices are set up. One of the use case that I explained earlier is this multi-persona UE, where a tablet in a factory floor device could be connected to a robot in the factory floor as well as to an internet traffic. So in such a case, once the slices are set up, for each slice you have a separate UP and UPF, and based on the PDU session the slice belongs to, the DU will split the traffic to the respective CU-UP. So the disaggregation in the radio access network into this RU, DU and CU, CP, UP allows you to isolate the traffic right from the radio network onwards. So this gives you like isolated slices right from the radio network all the way up to your core network, and beyond the core network you can have separate routing paths set up from UPF onwards. And between the CU-UP and UPF, what we call as the backhaul network, these slices could be routed through different NPLS or L3 VPN or SRv6 paths. These paths could be traffic engineered, and 3GPP has this concept of network instance. It is nothing but a name or an index into a policy in CU-UP and UPF. So based on the network instance the PDU session belongs to, the CU-UP and the UPF will apply a policy to route the packet through a specific L3 VPN or a specific MPLS tunnel, or could be a VLAN also. If it is through a VLAN, a provider edge router will map that VLAN to a L3 VPN or L2 VPN beyond this point. So that's how the slicing happens end to end from the radio network all the way up to core network, including the transport networks in between. So this slide talks about a case where different UEs are using different slices. It's essentially similar to the same slide as before, but each UE is using different slice. So here you have one UE using the pink slice, another UE using the yellow slice, and another UE using a purple slice. Now, coming to some interesting topologies that 5G network allows you based on the slicing concept and the edge data routing concepts. So this factory network is one of the use cases where you can set up an entire network within the premises of a factory. And because the CU, DU and the 5G core, all of them could be virtualized and can be deployed as a workload in a Kubernetes cluster, all it needs is to set up data centers at different hierarchies. An orchestrator could be placing the workloads in whichever data center that is required to handle the required latency. For a factory network sort of a scenario, the CU-DU and the 5GC workload can be placed in a local data center, or it could be placed in a operator-hosted edge data center, depending on the use case. And 5G in the radio layer allows you to do grant-based access, and there are deterministic access mechanism that allows you to have these robust link-specific mechanisms and also low latency at the radio level. The second use case is this neutral host deployments. If you could think of, say, a factory or a stadium sort of a scenario where UEs from multiple operators will be coming into that local network, there could be a locally hosted radio access network within the premises of the hotel or the stadium, and that radio access network could connect to multiple core networks. For example, one guest to the hotel could come from AT&T, one could come from Verizon, one could come from T-Mobile, and a common RAN could route to each of these networks. So that is another use case that is possible. Then enterprise deployment, as I told earlier, today predominantly enterprise deployments use Wi-Fi. 5G also provides a viable alternative to this. It provides you grant-based access and then deterministic QoS. As I mentioned, the components of the radio network like this DU and CU, because it is virtualized, can be hosted either in the factory floor or in an edge data center hosted by the operator. So all these interesting use cases become possible And since the IP routing can be broken out and sent anywhere, as I explained earlier, these interesting use cases show up now. So coming to the last part of this tutorial, I want to touch up briefly on the security aspects of 5G. So if you take 5G security as a broad concept, you need to look at both the signaling plane or the control plane security as well as the data plane security. Coming to the control plane security, you have to look at what is the security mechanism available in the core network versus what is available in the radio access network. In the core network, the key thing that is important is concealing the subscriber's identity. So today in the 4G network, the IMSI, which is the subscriber's identity burnt into your SIM card, that goes in plain text in some of the scenarios. In 5G, what they did is they came up with this concept of subscriber concealed identifier. So your IMSI never goes in plain text in the core network. It is only known between the UE and the UDM or the authentication function in the network the UE belongs to. Nowhere else it goes in plain text. And then all the interfaces, control plane interfaces, which are REST APIs, are secured by HTTP over TLS. It is recommended to use TLS 1.3, but most of the networks today use TLS 1.2. And as I mentioned earlier, the API access authorization itself is based on OAuth 2.0, which is another IETF technology. The roaming security between roaming network and a home network is ensured by this element called security proxy on the control plane. This can employ either TLS or an application layer security. In the application layer, because all the signaling happens through REST API, the content of the REST API, which is nothing but JSON, gets ciphered through this JOSI mechanism, JSON object secure encryption mechanism, which is again another IETF technology. So all these key IETF technology are getting used with respect to security in the 5G control plane. And then between the user equipment and the core network, the NAS signaling gets integrity protected and ciphered based on 3GPP integrity and ciphering protocols. The radio access network, as I mentioned, between the G-Node B, CU, UP and the UE, this ciphering happens through the PDCP layer. And the interfaces between the DU and CU are protected through IPsec, as I showed in one of the slides, where the GDPU packet itself gets tunneled into an IPsec tunnel. And the signaling plane gets ciphered either through IPsec or through DTLS. The signaling plane, they use a SCTP protocol for transport, and that SCTP transport can run on top of a DTLS. And if the radio network is split into the RU and DU, again, as I mentioned, the RU could be a dumb device sitting in a cell site. The onboarding of that RU into that network has to be secure. So ORAN Alliance has specified secure onboarding process for this radio unit through certificate-based authentication. So that can be used. So overall, on the control plane side, this provides you an end-to-end security in the 3GPP network. Coming to the user plane security, in the core network between the UPF and any other uplink classifier UPF or branching point UPF, the ciphering is ensured by IPsec. So there are site-to-site IPsec tunnels set up between these UPFs, which carries this GPU traffic. And in the RAN, as I mentioned, again, PDCP ciphering and integrity protection kicks in, and the interfaces are ciphered through IPsec. So this slide provides an overview of the security aspects within RAN alone. So as I mentioned, the different interfaces in the RAN in an ORAN architecture are protected by IPsec. On the frontal, you have this TLS and secure certificate-based authentication for the RU to onboard into the network. And then the frontal interface itself carries the user plane traffic, which is already PDCP ciphered. So that's how the overall security in the 5G network is ensured. Coming to some of the myths and realities. So So the first myth that we keep hearing, especially if you are a IP-centric engineer, people think that 5G is only about the radio network. The IP routing is like same as any other IP routing or the 4G routing, but it's not so. As I showed in the initial part of my presentation, the standalone network has a completely different core network architecture. So every control plane element is now REST API based. And in the user plane, new use cases like this edge breakouts and uplink classifier, UPF, multi-homed IPv6 session, all these things are coming in the core network and the IP layer. So there are interesting things to be explored for an IP engineer as well from 5G perspective. The second myth that we hear is whenever we talk about 5G, people only think that it is extreme throughput or it means speed. It's not so. Enhanced mobile broadband is one of the use cases only. There are other use cases like ultra reliable and low latency and machine type communication, where the throughput itself could be low, but these are very latency sensitive services. As I mentioned earlier, the architecture enables you to achieve these different use cases by placing your workloads at different places in the hierarchy. By virtualizing and then making the elements in the RAN and the core network cloud native, you can achieve these different use cases by placing the workloads at the right hierarchy. And throughput in the radio layer is as such is a function of the radio bandwidth available and the location of the UE within a cell. So the cell has a specific radius. So if you are at the edge of the cell, your signal to noise ratio in that cell could be poor. So if your signal to noise ratio is poor, even though you might have that entire bandwidth, channel bandwidth, you may not still be able to achieve the peak throughput. So the peak throughput of the channel is governed by this Shannon's theorem. What Shannon's theorem says is bandwidth multiplied by log to the base 2 of 1 plus SNR in bits per second. And the signal to noise ratio typically is measured in dB scale. You need to convert that into normal power scale. So removing the dB, and you need to apply that in this formula to get your channel capacity. But this is the theoretical channel capacity. There are control channel overheads in the radio layer which could make the available channel capacity less than the theoretical channel capacity. So that is the bandwidth you will actually get. So you cannot expect like peak throughput everywhere in the network. The third myth we see is all of these use cases, MBE, MBB, URLLC, machine type use cases, you will start seeing it day one from the deployment of 5G. That will not be the case. Initial deployments that you are seeing in the market are predominantly targeting this eMBB use case. The radio layer design, which is called new radio in 3GPP NR, offers you a lot of flexibility, but this flexibility comes at a cost and complexity. In order to support all these use cases, you have to take it step by step. So people will be deploying the eMBB use cases initially and then slowly getting into the URLLC use cases when they get into this factory floor sort of deployment and private networks where URLLC seems very promising. That's how this network will evolve. Another myth we see is 5G might kill Wi-Fi. It will not happen. Wi-Fi will coexist. Wi-Fi has its own set of use cases. There are use cases where NR performs better. For example, low latency and grant-based access, where you need to guarantee the access for, say, a robot sort of a device. Those are the scenarios where NR might be better than Wi-Fi, since Wi-Fi access acts in listen before talk, and everybody has equal rights to get the channel sort of mode. It may not be able to guarantee you the bandwidth all the time and offer you the link level robustness, whereas NR could offer that. But Wi-Fi could still exist in a lot of these enterprise scenarios which we see today, and it will continue to exist. And the last myth that we keep hearing is 5G is a health hazard. This is a laughable claim. The hazard is not a function of radio frequency as such. It is a function of the exposed power or energy level. As you know, radio frequency is one of the electromagnetic frequency, right? Any electromagnetic radiation, including visible light, if you are exposed to more than prescribed power levels, it is harmful to the human body. For example, if you stand near a 1000-watt halogen lamp for 1 hour, you can see the visible discomfort in your body, right? It's as good as that. You are exposed to that sort of high energy levels, your body is going to take the hit. And one of the key characteristic of radio frequency is the power dissipates as the square of the distance from the base station. The formula is the received power is transmit power divided by 4 pi distance square. So as the distance from the base station increases, the received power is going to decrease drastically. The power that is received at your phone will be of the order of few milliwatts. Whereas the prescribed norms for the human body to absorb is around 1.6 watts per kilogram of tissue. This is called the specific absorption limit specified by the health industry. So any power that is received below this limit is not going to be harmful to your body. So 5G is not harmful. It's not a health hazard. Any myth in that regard is an unnecessary myth, I would say.
Sridhar, since you asked me to tell you, it's 10:30.
Yeah, I'm to the last part of the slide. I can just carry on for a couple of minutes.
Oh, perfect. There are a few questions as well. Just if
I can handle that. I can handle it for 10 minutes, not an issue.
Perfect.
So coming to the last part, role of IETF in 5G. So there are a number of protocols from IETF which have been used in 3GPP. So in the signaling plane, HTTP2, JSON, OR 2.0, JSON web encryption, which are part of the JOSI standards. And then the on-demand mobility, which I showed in the initial part of slide, where you can set up this multi-homed IPv6. SIP, which has been used for VoLTE calls even in LTE days, SCTP transport, and many more. There are many IETF technologies which are used in 5G. And in the user plane, as I mentioned, IPv6 multi-homing is a key part of 5G. And in the management plane, netconf is predominantly used for the management of the network. So IETF had a huge role to play in 5G. So that concludes my presentation. I am open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sridhar. This is incredible. I'm so glad this is being recorded because I can play it over and over again. I have 100 questions, but I'll save those for later. I hope we can have you again. So let me ask you a couple of the questions from the audience. Is the QFI marking in the GTP header copied from the IP DSCP?
So the QFI marking is done by the UPF. As I mentioned, the IP packet enters into the cellular network at the UPF. The UPF looks at the flow of the IP packet. So the flow could be identified based on DSCP marking, destination IP address, source IP address, protocol. So all these things play a role in identifying the flow. Based on the flow, it will mark the QFI in the GDPU tunnel. So there's a flow classification happening in the UPF.
Okay, great. There's, as I said, there's a ton more. Okay, so but what was I say? Dhruv, just stop me if we need to run out of time. Okay, so how is data sent to the internet and to a private network when roaming? Is it through visited networks UPF or the home network UPF?
So let me go to one of the initial slides I had. Yeah, you see here, this is roaming architecture. The left-hand portion is the visited PLMN, which is your visited network, and right-hand side is your home network. So when the PDU session is set up by the UE, the So in the signaling plane, it will always go to the home network. So during the PDU session setup, the AMF and the SMF in the visitor network will be getting some of the subscription details from the UDM. The UDM is always in the home network through this proxy, SCPP proxy, and based on the subscribed rule, it will tell whether a specific PDU session needs to be a local breakout PDU session or a home routed PDU session. If it is a home routed PDU session, this visitor network will contact the SMF in this visitor network will contact the SMF in the home network, and the SMF in the home network will set up the session in the UPF in the home network. So every traffic will get routed for that PDU session from the visitor network all the way to the home network. But if the subscribed rule says that this specific PDU session has to be local breakout, then the visitor network sets up the routing directly from this UPF. It does not go to the home UPF. So for example, the internet PDN, internet PDU session could be marked as a home routed traffic, whereas the voice PDU session, IMS PDU session could be marked as local breakout traffic. So the IMS PDU session could be broken out directly from here.
Great, thanks. Now, Michael, I think Mike Ackerman had a question. Mike, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, that'll be perfect.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Fantastic. I just wanted to say that this is by far the best 5G presentation I've ever seen. Thank you so much for doing it. And I have a gazillion things I'd like to talk about, but I'm going to beg Nalini and Dhruv to maybe set up another session with you someday. So if you're willing to do that, that would be just fantastic. But I do want to squeeze one quick question in, and that is, do you feel that IPv6 or IPv4 works better over 5G? And you know the answer I want to hear, but I just had to ask it.
So the PDU session that is set up for a UE could be an IPv4 session or a V6 session. So it's entirely up to the network whether they want to deploy IPv6. Now, I think your question is more with respect to tunneling, right? Tunneling the V4 packet over a V6. Is that the question?
It is, and overall performance to the end user. In other words, I'm looking for this to be a reason to get enterprises and others to deploy IPv6 because it either works better over 5G, maybe it performs better, or maybe it just needs more addresses, or just any reason that it might be better.
Yeah, if you are setting up a greenfield network, so enterprise networks are typically greenfield, and you are setting up that network specific within that enterprise premises. So you can straight away start with IPv6 there. If you are deploying 5G on top of a brownfield network, then there will be a mix of IPv4 and V6. You could deploy V6 in the 5G arm of the network while keeping V4 with 4G. So that could be one deployment option. And beyond the UPF, where it's only plain IP routing, whether you use IPv4 or V6 depends on what sort of routers you have already in place, right? And
okay, really good answer. Fantastic presentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Sridhar, I'm gonna ask you to have a complete presentation on that topic, maybe alone. Dhruv, do I still have time? We've got a bunch of more questions.
Just 2 minutes.
I can take a few more questions. No.
2 minutes. Okay, so let me ask one more. Wi-Fi 6 apparently matches many of the 5G capabilities, and it's designed to guarantee slice continuity while handing over. Is this true?
Is your question about Wi-Fi?
Wi-Fi 6.
Sorry, I lost you.
Yeah, can you hear Wi-Fi? Can you hear Wi-Fi 6?
Okay, you are asking about Wi-Fi 6, right?
Yes. Wi-Fi 6 seemingly matches many 5G capabilities.
I agree. So on the radio layer, Wi-Fi 6 has introduced some of the grant-based access mechanism, but still as a spectrum, the unlicensed spectrum has to abide by the listen before talk rule. So the channel is accessible to everybody in that link, right? So whoever grabs the channel for usage, they get it. And if a user is at the weakest link and his access is kind of getting errors, so there is going to be this sort of back off, and the channel access back off could cause some detrimental effect to the other users. So this used to be the case in the previous generations of Wi-Fi. But I guess with Wi-Fi 6, more grant-based access has come in. So yeah, that should alleviate some of the problems. But I myself is not a expert in Wi-Fi area. I have a high-level knowledge there, but not deeper into it, I would say.
Yeah, that would be really super interesting to have some kind of real comparison. If I have time for one more, is there work in OAuth that allows IoT to cache tokens over long periods of time to avoid interrupting the end user?
That's a question to IETF experts, right? Who are actively working in OAuth.
Sure. We can certainly.
Yeah, 3GPP is just using what IETF has defined. 3GPP has not innovated on top of it. It's just using it as it is.
Sure. We can defer that. Dhruv, let me hand it over. As I say, Sridhar, we have a million questions for you. Guys, please, I think his contact information is there. If you don't mind, people can ask. And as I say, I'm gonna go ahead and speak for Dhruv and say that we would really love to have you speaking again. I'll contact you offline.
Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you so much. So now, the last but not least session is our own Dhruv Dhody speaking about network slicing and what is going on at the IETF, and then Srihari from Juniper speaking about one particular implementation of it. So let me tell you about Dhruv first. Dhruv is the president of IIESOC, which is one of the co-hosts of this entire conference. And of course, he is, without him, I'm just going to say this conference would not have happened. Just saying. he's an extraordinarily accomplished person. He's been working in networking for over 16 years with Huawei, and he's done a ton of work in the PCE, segment routing, and network slicing areas. He's got 15 RFCs as the main editor and 12 as contributor. He has 21 patents. He's also the PCE working group co-chair, part of the routing directorate, and the sergeant at arms. So be careful what you say on IETF lists. Do not fall afoul of Dhruv. And he is, of course, co-founder of IIESOC and on the board of INTC. We're also very happy to have Srihari. He's a distinguished engineer at Juniper, and thank you so much for the sponsorship from Juniper. Srihari brings a great deal to the table in terms of his experience in segment routing, traffic engineering, and network slicing. And he has many RFCs and patents, as well as being co-author of a practical BGP book. We sure need more books like that. With that, let me hand it over to Dhruv. Again, thank you so much.
Thanks, Nalini. Since we are running out of time, I'll try to be a little bit faster. Let me start. We had an excellent presentation from Sridhar, who talked at about the 5G network. I will try to cover where does IETF network slicing comes in, and then Srihari will take it and go into detail about a solution that they have recently proposed in IETF. So my job is cover the definition, talk about the framework, and what are the various realization techniques that we can use in the IETF network. Okay, so some quick background. Uh, uh, in ITF, we have been doing connectivity. Like VPNs is our main simple form of connectivity. We do L2 and L3. We simply say we have these two networks. Can you connect them uh, as a service to our ISPs? That's nothing but connectivity. We have been doing traffic engineering, and in traffic engineering, the two main concepts are the abstraction, which is sort of summarization, and the virtualization. So, virtualization means the concept of a virtual network, asking for edge to edge connectivity with a certain qualities and giving a virtual, even in the VPN, the V part is virtual. So, we have been doing this virtualization for a while, and we have had multiple flavors, asking for just connectivity, maybe asking for enhanced connectivity where we also ask for bandwidth. We also let customer manage these connectivity. So there is a customer managed connectivity option and customer operated connectivity option, especially in carriers of carriers and IP over optical. So I wanted to give you an idea and a background that we have been doing this for a while now. So what is the new requirement because of, say, 5G that now our ITF networks have to take care of? So what is this new requirements that we need to worry about? The first key thing is that we would have multiple virtual and independent networks, logical networks, over the same shared infrastructure. And for each of these logical networks, we need to tailor them to fulfill diverse requirement. We just saw from Sridhar's presentation that there are various diverse requirements coming from 5G, and we need to make sure that we can tailor them and at the same time handle all of them over the same shared physical infrastructure. So what do we need to do? We need to make sure that we can partition our network, and some of this we know how to do. We have been doing VPNs, overlays, uh, even traffic engineering with RSVPT. These days SDN also helps us do a lot of these things. So some of the tools we already have. We also need to do some guaranteeing, that we need to now make sure that one service does not impact other service. We took the example of a factory use case where one slice is just an internet slice and another slice is actually controlling your robots in the factory floor. So of course you need a different kind of service guarantee for one slice over other, and need to make sure that the impact of one on another is reduced. We need to make sure to reserve resources, not just bandwidth, especially in the compute is now coming in as well. We talked about a lot of edge network functions that needs to be deployed. So even within the network, we need to take care of those functions. So the compute part also comes in, link, bandwidth, all those stuffs. Isolation is something which is very interesting. I will cover isolation a little bit more in the future slides as well. But the basic idea is, since we have multiple slices over a shared infrastructure, so actually we are shared. We are not really dedicated infrastructure in any way, but we still need to isolate things in terms of either performance, traffic, security, privacy management. All these aspects come under isolating one slice from another. And at the end, the key feature is that we need to make this easy programmatically, orchestrate it automatically using software. We can't rely on manual stuff to set up these slices. So again, the control and orchestration part plays a key idea in terms of network slicing. So this network slicing, I'm still talking in a generic terms. I've not come into the definition of ITF network slicing, which is what I'll do next. So we saw a similar figure even with Sridhar's presentation. Of course, it doesn't have all the 3GPP terms here, but at a very general level, we are saying that you have these tenants, you have your RAN and edge network, you have your core DC, and then you have the network that interconnects this. That's where the ITF scoped network comes in. In 3GPP, all the things that Sridhar was talking about was this end-to-end network slice. And of course, they have worried about doing things in RAN and core. So a lot of stuff was based on the definitions happening and in these two sides. The other part is the ITF network slice. So within the ITF, we are only focused on the slicing of this network and making sure that we achieve the use cases that are coming from an end-to-end network slice. So these are all end-to-end network slice, but our work in IETF is, and especially in the TEAS working group where this is being defined, is how to set up an IETF network slice within an IETF scope network, and making sure that end-to-end network slices can use the IETF network slice to achieve their use cases. Okay, let's move to the definition of an IETF network slice. So only the part which is within the IETF scope network. So we define IETF network slice as a logical network topology connecting various endpoints uh, uh, with shared or dedicated network resources. And the key part is we need to specify the service level objectives. So this is the definition that you will see it in RFC. Let's break it down. The first thing that you need to realize is we use the word IETF to limit the scope of network slice within the IETF networks. Earlier, this was called actually transport network slice. We were borrowing the term that might be a little bit more popular in the 3GPP circle to identify this network. But within the IETF, the transport is an overloaded terms because of the transport area, MPLS TP, all that stuff. So a lot of debate happened, and finally the conclusion was, let's call it IETF network slicing. And that's what we are reaching out to our liaisons and other places when we are talking about network slicing in IETF. Another key thing that IETF needs to make sure is that 5G is not our only use case. We are defining a generic IETF network slicing concept that can actually meet other use cases as well, like data center interconnect, carriers of carrier, network wholesale service. So all those things needs to be supported, should be generic enough to slice based on any of these use cases. We want to define things in a technology agnostic way and completely independent of what is the underlying infrastructure connectivity. So whether we are using SRv6, whether we are using SR, MPLS, optical networks, doesn't matter. At least the definition of the network slice and the higher level concept should be in a technology agnostic way. We should enable diverse set of applications, make sure that they can coexist on the same infrastructure. So that's the very quick definition of IETF network slice. The key part was the SLO. So let's break those service characteristics for a IETF network slice a little bit. The main thing that we need to make sure is the things needs to be quantifiable. Like we need to mention this in when you are creating a slice, mention things which are actually can be quantified, can be measured either directly or indirectly. To do that, we have three concepts: SLI, SLO, and SLA. What is SLI? SLI stands for service level indicator. This is the quantified measure of network performance. So what are you going to measure? Think example, throughput or latency. So this is the things that will indicate how my service is running. So these are my service level indicators. Objective is the target value or range of this indicator. So an example, latency less than 50 milliseconds. That will become my objective, right? So when you set up a slice, we give a set of SLOs, various indicators to make sure that our service level are being met. So if we take the 5G use cases, and if it is ultra reliable latency slice, then maybe latency is my main thing. If it is my other slice, maybe bandwidth is my main thing. So basically like this, you will have different objectives for different slice. Again, we do not talk in terms of how do you achieve this objective. We are using the intent logic, and this was covered in hot in networking track as well. Jeff gave an excellent presentation on intent. So this is again, SLO is an intent of sorts. We are defining, we are not defining how, but we are defining what are our service level objective, not how our network needs to be configured to meet these objectives, right? And these can still be direct or indirect measurable. What is an SLA? This is the most common term that which people use in our industry anyway. That is basically a contract between consumer and provider, which uses SLOs as a way to write this contract, right? So that's our agreement. We had a big debate over isolation. I covered isolation in the earlier slide. When we had network slicing, isolation is always described as one of the key parameters of network slice. But based on our definition above, the debate was whether isolation can be called an SLO or not, mainly because of the quantifiable characteristics here. Can you quantify an isolation? The idea behind isolation is basically we want to make sure that there is no negative impact of one slice over other. That's why we use the word isolation. But how can we represent isolation? Maybe breaking down into other parameters like, oh, traffic separation, interference avoidance, service assurance. Is it better to use these terms or to have something called as isolation? In industry, there's a term called hard isolation and soft isolation that has become a little bit popular. So that's also is the place where ITF is debating what is the best way to handle it. Ideally, we will never have a pure isolation. Everything is in shared network. We have to think of a way, what a term I like to use is called pragmatic isolation. So I will cover that a little bit in a future slide as well. So this is one of the key part of IETF network slice, where the SLO is used to describe the slice. What are the other parameters to describe the slice? You need to worry about endpoints. You need to tell which are the endpoints that needs to connect. Endpoints could be anything. It could be a network function, a device, an application, anything. It's a conceptual unit, but you need to define what are the endpoints. You need to tell what is the connectivity requirement. A common case could be P2P, P2MP, hub and spoke, full mesh, all that stuff, and then your SLO. So if you define these things, this is how an higher level system, like maybe the 5G end-to-end system, gives its requirement to the IETF network slice in terms of endpoints, connectivity requirements, and SLO. So we have a proposed framework. Note that whatever we have been talking about is still a lot of work which is still proposed. It's still under discussion. The progress is going on. There was a design team. There was drafts. Last call took a while. So things are still, things at this moment are actually getting pretty settled. And we are hoping that, like, within the next IETF or so, even the definition draft and the framework draft are adopted. But again, this is just adoption. This is not finalization. Adoption is when the working group process starts, and a lot more debate and things needs to happen in this area. But we at least are coming together and clearing up all the confusion that was there in the industry compared to some time ago. So again, the main thing here is you have end-to-end slice. So again, IETF is only a part of this end-to-end system. So that's where the IETF network slice controller comes in. This is maybe an end-to-end network slice orchestrator, a 5G system. And then you have other controllers which are taking care of RAN slicing and core slicing. So those are outside of IETF scope. Within the IETF system, we need a mechanism, a NOD-bound interface for somebody to request our IETF network slice, and with a full life cycle management, creation, modification, monitoring, deletion. This is where the orchestration and management of the slice is coming in. And then the job of the NSC would be to realize this requirement, if I want to use the word intent even, from the higher level system into the reality of my network, and based on the technology that I've actually deployed in my network. So this realization, one of the realization techniques is what you will see at the part 2 of this. And I will not go in detail this far, but I want to just give you the concept so that once we go in deep dive, you will appreciate this a little bit more. So we need to do a realization, and then we need to maintain a mapping between what was requested and what is actually realized. And note that we just don't have one slice, we have multiple slices. So this mapping is a very important part of making sure the isolation and the other service guarantees that we have been talking about is actually guaranteed by this network slice controller. So NBI is one of the key parts that the T's working group would deliver with IETF network slicing. It will be a technology agnostic NBI, which should allow you to create, delete the whole lifecycle management that you see earlier. It should have a way to tell what are the endpoints, what are the connectivity, something which we call even slice member, if you look at the Yang models that are being proposed. And then you have SLOs. You have to say that for these connectivities, what are our set of SLOs? The SLOs could be well known, or it could be something that can be a custom template that can be created by the higher level system. And it's not just creation and deletion, it also needs to take care of status and monitoring. We need to continuously give feedback to the higher level system that what slice he has asked the IETF network controller to create, how is it functioning? Because he needs to make sure the end-to-end slice continue to meet the requirement end-to-end. And monitoring will play a most important part, and telemetry and monitoring will definitely play a huge part in delivering a network slicing solution. And I talked about mapping earlier. So there might be other Yang models beyond the NBI, which is a consumer view of the slice, but maybe even a provider view is needed, which is going to be the mapping between this NBI and how I have done the realization. Because again, there are multiple realization techniques. So you need to have a very good mapping between the various realization techniques and the NBI. That's the work again. That is again just proposed. I'm giving you a very high level information here. So what does IETF offers? We already have a very good set of building blocks done already. ACTN is something that I worked on, and if you have been attending Connections, you will see some of these things have actually been discussed in the past connection. I talked about ACTN back in Bangalore 2018. Adrian talked about enhanced VPN in Kolkata 2019. All those materials is actually available on our website as well. Yang, in IETF, a lot of work has been happening on Yang. There is VPN service models. There is traffic engineering, topology, tunnel, VNT mapping, all that stuff. So a lot of Yang models are already getting standardized. Some of the techniques well established in are, of course, we want to use some of the SDN concept, the VPNs, the traffic engineering, DetNet, the segment routing, OEM mechanisms of monitoring and telemetry. These are the techniques that will help us to deliver or realize the IETF network slicing. And of course, various IETF protocols that are listed here. Let me cover only two of these very, very quickly, and I should give enough time for Srihari to explain one of the realization techniques. ACTN was something that is standardized in RFC 8453. It was, the idea behind ACTN was that we had multiple heterogeneous network domains. And I need to, when I'm trying to satisfy a customer requirements, I need to abstract the reality of my network. So that's where the abstraction part of ACTN comes in, and then give an abstracted view of my network to the customer, and then match the customer's requirements, which are nothing but the virtual networks, and match those virtual network requirements by coordinating my multi-domain and service across these multi-domain and multi-layered network. So this is where the coordination and orchestration is coming in. This is where breaking down customer view into the network and provider view is happening. So all those parts, we already have a very good set of framework already available. And in fact, the network slice framework matches quite well with the ACTN framework as well. So one of the key building block is already with us. Another building block is actually a working group adopted document in T's working group. This enhanced VPN or VPN plus, what it says is it tries to enhance an already established VPN service by saying that let's have a mechanism to guarantee the network resources and predictable performance. Very much the the network slicing idea here. So how does it do that? It says that to do that, what we need to do is we need to have a tighter coordination and integration between underlay and overlay. So our VPNs are our overlay, but in our underlay also we need to leak some information, and the information that it leaks is something called as a virtual transport network, which is an underlay customized network topology tightly coupled to the VPN. And based on this tightly coupling of VPN and the underlay is nothing but enhanced VPN, right? So it's not just pure overlay, we need to have a tighter coordination to meet this guarantee of network resources and predictable performance. So some techniques this is again a framework document, and it says that this is what we want to achieve. It builds on what we saw in ACTN and service model, but now it says that we need some kind of enhanced data plane, such as maybe Flexi or TSN, and have a mechanism to slice, again, slice being one of the key use cases of enhanced VPN, of my data plane and match this VTN with the VPN that I'm showing to my customer. So this is, again, at a very high level, very quick idea. Adrian gave a wonderful presentation of this in the last Connections. So if you want to know more information, look at that. Now, last slide for me. What is this work also doing for Enhanced VPN? They are targeting segment routing as one of the key ways to realize their Enhanced VPN framework. Something which is already standardized in Spring is when you have your SR segments, can I have resource awareness in this SR segments? So this is already a working group adopted draft. The rest of the things that you will see are all ideas which are currently proposed. They are all individual documents yet. Lot more work and consensus needs to be built within the IETF community. But my job with this overview is, look, there is a lot of work happening here. There are a lot of solutions, and let's see how does our industry come together to solve this problem. Some of the things that are proposed, let me put slice ID in my SRv6 SID itself. Can I use multi-topology and flex algo as a way to define my slice in my underlay network? Can I do something with my BGP? Can I do something with an IPv6 extension header? All those things are some of the proposed solutions to achieve this use case. There is another solution that which says, these things looks very hacky. Let us come up with something new, which is administrative instance identifier, a new name for slice-based identifier, another thing that has been introduced. And then in the part 2 of the talk, we will hear from Srihari how to realize slice, their solution for IP MPLS network. So I will stop here now. If you have any questions for IETF network slicing, I see there are no questions and we are running out of time. So I'll rather give it off to Srihari now. And if there are questions, both he and I can answer at the end of this presentation. So part 2, a deep dive into one such realization technique, realizing slice in IP MPLS network. Off to you, Srihari. I'll stop sharing and you can start.
Thank you, Dhruv. Thank you for an excellent presentation. You guys can hear me?
Yes, Srihari, I can hear you.
Okay. I'm going to share this. I'm sharing my screen. Please let me know if you're able to see this.
Yes.
All right. Let me put it in a slideshow. All right. Cool. So thanks for the presentation and the background, Dhruv. And good morning, folks, and good evening. My name is Srihari Sangli, and I work for Juniper Networks. In the next number of minutes, Dhruv, how much time do I have for this? About 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, or?
Yeah, 20, 25,
okay,
including
wonderful.
Questions.
Thank you. Cool. All right. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to go over what is our Juniper solution for realizing the network slices in the IP MPLS network. And feel free to ask any questions, and we'll be happy to take questions at the end of the presentation. And my colleague, all the credits for this proposal goes to my credits to my colleagues at Juniper. All right. So what we're going to talk about in the next set of slides is I'm going to cover with a brief introduction, building upon what Sridhar and Dhruv talked about on the network slicing, give an overview of our solution, of the Juniper network slicing solution, touch upon what deployment modes that we think will be useful for enabling the network slicing solution, and then I'm going to conclude. All right. We've heard, I think Sridhar has made a very good presentation on 5G, what requirements, what the new requirements that 5G is going to bring into the network today. And all of these will mean the providers will have to look at how do they look at their existing network? How can they probably structure their network, or what sort of new enhancement that they can bring in for their existing services that they're offering, so that they can not just only offer those 5G services, but also enhance their existing services. So if these are going to be something that providers are going to be looking at, so from a vendor's perspective, or also from an overall standardization perspective, we have a task to look at what does it mean to offer network slice in a network, and how do we help enable the network, and the network, as we know from an IETF network perspective, it can span from anywhere in all of these areas of from access to the core of the IETF network. And we also know that most of the networks, or some of the networks, I should say, have been looking at what is the controller, what is the role of the controller, and how do we leverage the controller in offering the network services for the network slicing. Okay. So with that background, I'm going to build upon what Dhruv talked about. He introduced what is IETF network slice, and what does it really mean. So from that point onwards, I'm going to leverage and build more upon that. So from a service provider perspective, the problem at hand will be, I have a physical network infrastructure, and how do I enable multiple network slices over it? And when I enable these network services, I need to be able to run some services over it and offer the services to the customer, and thereby make money. And that's the bottom line for any provider. Now, each of these slices define SLOs, and thanks to Dhruv, he talked definitely more details about SLO, SLI, and SLA. But each of the slices come with a defined set of SLOs. And that means that the traffic that falls within the slice, as the traffic goes through the network, using some of the network resources, these SLOs have to be met by each and every router and the link that the traffic goes through. Now, looking at all of these requirements, as well as what the provider's existing network, what we did was we looked at what are the elements that would be needed for building this network slice, and how do we leverage existing technologies, be it routing protocols, or be it the controller architecture, and also what we can leverage from the DiffServ. We looked at what elements are needed, and we put together all of these elements and tried to see how we can build a model where we can express a network slice. And when we express this network slice as a model, we can then take this model to go, when it comes to a device, how do we express the model from a device perspective? And how do we express this network slices in the model from a network resource perspective, right? And what does it mean from making sure all the traffic that falls within that falls for a slice, it needs to meet the SLO. What does it mean from a per-hop behavior, and how do we make sure the per-hop behavior is expressed and realized as the packet goes through the network? And what are the various per-hop behavior that we can offer and realize that? And from a head-end perspective, with the ingress router or the path computation engine, PCE, how do we place the paths such that we get to leverage the enhancements that we could bring in from a protocol perspective, from a slice awareness, and also from a protocol, from a data plane extensions that we would expect to bring in the per-hop behavior. How do we leverage those to bring in slice awareness, both not just in the control plane, but also in the data plane? So we put together all of those, and what our solution is, from a definitely starting from a controller perspective, any controller mean you need to leverage as much automation as possible. And that means any automation means you need to be able to have a model that you can deal with, so that automation will be more easier and key for dealing with anything that you do from a network resource, network node, or link, anything like that. A model would definitely go hand in hand. And Dhruv talked about a lot of different models that IETF have been dealing with in terms of Yang models that are defined. So from this model that we have defined, for network slice in our solution, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide, this model that that you can see in the bottom picture here, it caters to all the functionalities of a network slice, and that means this model probably need to be present on all the routers that would be part of this network slice or in the inter-network. So to be able to take this model and dump it into all the routers, again, we have built flexibility in that. So either you could leverage the protocol extensions, IGP or the BGP-LS to do that, or use netconf or even gRPC to propagate the model definition to all the routers. And all this means is the model is now present in all the routers, and this model will help not just in the control plane, but also in the data plane, so that it all adds up to providing what the SLO that the slice would be looking for in terms of end-to-end. Could be bandwidth guarantee, could be anything with URLLC or EMBB, bandwidth or latency, anything like that can be provided once we have the model defined on all the routers. Now, from a model perspective, let me expand more on what the models are, what the parts or the fields within the model that we're talking about. So our slice definition model consists of these aspects. One, there is a data plane slice selector. Now, this is a slice selector that will help identify each and every packet that goes in the network to say this packet belongs to this particular slice. The classification, the identification for classifying the packet to a slice is present in the slice, in the packet, and that's what we call the slice selector. And the second aspect is a slice will mean dedicated or semi-dedicated set of resources, both on the control plane and the data plane. I say semi-dedicated because you may want to have some shareability aspects. So when it comes to data plane resources, we obviously can think of queues and schedulers and all the queue related management that goes on in the router. And in the control plane, we talked about how do we place, how do we deal with bandwidth, how do we deal with shared resource group, if you want to make multiple slices share the resources, and if they are sharing, and how do we make sure the prioritization is brought in between those slices. And we say the slice is going to be a network end-to-end connecting certain endpoints, and when they're connecting certain endpoints, it also means that it's gonna honor the SLO, and this can only be achieved if we have a topology that is associated with the slice. So when we have a topology associated, then it is a lot more easier to identify that I want to have these nodes in the network to be part of this slice, or I want to have these links to be part of this slice. And that will also help identify how can I place a path that will only fall within the topology that is associated with the slice and not go outside of that. Right? Now, I just want to make sure that when we define the slice, and Dhruv also talked about it as part of the IETF network slice, and we are making sure that the slice does not mean that it is defined by underlay transport, right? So slice is something that is defined based on the customer intent, and how the slice is provisioned or is realized can be through any of the forms of the transport. We could have SRT as a transport, or a FlexOlgo, or RSVP. Those will help us enable an establishment of the path that can be used for reaching the endpoints of the slice. But the slice is not a one-to-one thing to say transport will define the slice. And now that in the IETF, in the recent trends on the internet, everything is you need to have SR for enabling every new technology. Our solution is not. So you can, if you're a non-SR network, you can definitely enable network slicing, and doesn't mean you have to go to segment routing first to get to network slicing. Okay, let me expand a little bit more on the concept that I just introduced. Let's talk about slice selector. A slice selector in the MPLS network could be a label, for example. And this label identifies how the packet needs to be classified to. Now, also the slice selector will help every router along the path associate the per hop behavior or the forwarding treatment that needs to be applied for the packet. And with the diffs of concepts that we have derived, so you could also have hierarchical clause applied with the class selector. That way, every slice can have multiple classes of the traffic associated with it. So in the example below, in the diagram, I can show you that, let us say the slice selector is an MPLS label, and let us say this MPLS label is at the top of the MPLS stack. So that means as the packet goes through the network, you can see that the slice label 1001 is maintained to be the top label throughout the entire network, which means every router, at the ingress of the router, you will pop the label, you will look at the label and associate the per hop behavior that you need to apply. And as the packet is sent out of the box, you have to make sure the same slice label 1001 is pushed back into the stack such that the top label, the slice label is maintained at the top throughout the entire traffic path. On the underlay transport, we talked about the slice can be realized on any of the underlay transport. That means the slice is completely agnostic to the transport underlay. And this is only possible because we can then enable and connect networks that are deployed, multiple different transport technologies, and even those customers, or maybe an intermix of those technologies with such a network size can still be realized. And the options for placing the paths, you could very well have IGP computed SPF path or traffic engineered paths or even Flexolver constrained paths. So as you place the path within a slice, any of these options are possible. Now, let me expand a little bit more on what does it mean for enabling a path and placing a path. Now, we all know from a path computation, there is a state-dependent, network state-dependent path computation, or the network state-independent path computation. Network state-independent path computation is what we typically use from IGP's best path selection. It could be the lowest delay as the IGP selects the path. And network state-dependent could be based on what the traffic engineering enhancements were put in. So you know, all the traffic engineering metrics can be used to place the path by looking at, is there a congested link, and if so, how can I avoid the congested link? From a slice perspective, clearly we have a slice aware traffic engineering that can be done, or slice unaware traffic engineering. Let's talk about slice unaware traffic engineering. Now, if you have a network where if you want to bring in a slice unaware traffic engineering, that means the path computation that is done at the ingress of the PCE, it does not look at does not look at, is there any slice specific path? So which means all the paths that are placed for the slices from multiple slices all follow the same IGP path, all follow the same transport path that you would pick. So that means in the top picture, you can see that though the least delay path is chosen, all the slice traffic of all the multiple slices will follow the same path. And it might mean there may be congestion on one of the router, on the P5 router, particular queue may be congested. This is the slice unaware traffic engineering. But if you want to use Flexolgo, it maybe enhances a little bit more beyond this topology, because you can have a slice domain or congruent with the Flexolgo domain topology, in which case though you'll still be following the IGP's path computation, but you constrain the network such that only those green colored links are part of this Flexolgo. So therefore, you're making sure the congestion is avoided. But nevertheless, if you want to have multiple slices map the same Flexolgo, you will end up with the same problem as I described in the top diagram. In the bottom diagram, you can see that if I have a topology where I know what is my utilization on a link per slice, and if I communicate that information to the path computation engine or the ingress router, which can then build a slice-specific traffic engineering database, then I'll have more flexibility to place the path per slice, and thereby taking care of utilization per slice. And if there is any congestion, I can then still divert the slice LSP on some other path. So this, we believe, is going to be a significant differentiating factor for deploying slices. So your SLOs are always going to be met, as per definition. Now, from a slice selector, we have a number of different combinations, starting from forwarding labels. MPLS labels can be your slice selector. Either the when I say each of these slice selector, naturally it also means they are going to be providing the indication to what the proper behavior that would be applied for on every transit router, right? Or we could have a VPN labels or a range of VPN labels mapping to a slice selector. Or we could have a global slice label acting as a slice selector. Or in case of IP, you could have a destination address or multiple destination addresses mapped to the slice, common slice. So, or if you want to make it generic, multi-field, you can then pick and choose what fields a customer would like to see as a classifying factor to be able to say, then I want to have applying these for behavior, and I want to classify these kind of packets for a particular slice, right? That would be the job of a slice selector. Now, on the data plane resources, we talked about the anything to do with the queue management is all associated with the PHB, and you could definitely get a hierarchical clause by leveraging the diffserv class selector for that. Now, in our solution, either the model will come with a definite profile, class profile, or you could also refer to a specific local profile that has been configured, or you could also override it with the multiple profiles per interface as you see fit. And as the priorities from a control plane perspective, you could then say that, I want to have these slices come with a specific priority so that, you can prefer one slice over other slice. Or you could then say, I want to have these slices share the resources so that the unutilized resources can be shared at a point by another slice. For example, in the diagram below, you can see the blue slice and the red slice are sharing resources part of it. And you could also mention what would be the protection policy that in case of there's any link failure, then all my backup path, the backup path belongs to the same slice, or backup path can be outside of my slice, in which case I could then refer to either I want to have a strict guarantee of the SLO in the backup path, or I can relax the SLO as for any link failure and only during the time of backup path. And the slice topology is even more important for us because we define that model where we can then say these nodes are part of my slice and these links are part of my slice, and which helps us build the slice, the overall topology. And either single topology, there's a one-to-one mapping for topology to the slice, or you could have a multiple slice mapped to a single topology. In case, let's say you want to have a flex algo, then you could have multiple slices going through the same flex algo topology, right? All of those things are built into our model and the solution. Now, with that background, let me look at, take you guys through what the different deployment models that we have come up with, and how do we help customers deploy in their network the various network slicing solutions. We have at a top level, we look at there are 3 different classes of deployment modes that customers can look at. And depending on how the network is laid out, let's say in certain domain of their network, let's say access domain can run one mode, and the WAN, the core network can run another mode. So hybrid, this is what we call is a hybrid mode that is definitely supported. So from a data plane solution, data plane only slicing solution, what we talk about is, let's look at the data plane, and let's enhance the data plane of the network to be slice aware. And let's keep the control plane to be existing, the slice unaware control plane. And if so, how do we help enable deploying network slices, and what does it mean to the customer in terms of SLOs? The exact opposite would be, let's keep the data plane as is, and let's enhance the control plane so that control plane is now slice aware, and can we leverage that mode for enabling services, and this will satisfy many of the customer requirements that we have seen. And the last one would be, which is the most important one that customers may would look at the depending on their constraints, that I want to be able to place the path on a slice-aware path, and I want to be able to make sure the data plane is also equally enhanced to be able to offer the slice. So control plane, data plane, both put together, enhanced, would be the third mode that we look at. And I have the next set of slides that cover more details, and I'm gonna quickly go through given the amount of time that we have. So on the data plane slicing, like I said, control plane is completely unaware. And in the data plane, we have a slice selector, which will help you identify what the packet that belongs to a particular slice. And there is queues associated with it, and the necessary queue management of a particular packet naturally gets applied there. And all the transit nodes apply this behavior, and you get the end-to-end data plane queue management, enhanced per slice queue management behavior that you get. Now, this can be used in scenarios where, because control plane is completely unaware, you could then say, I don't want to worry about bandwidth, but I just want to deal with any congestion. So if there is any congestion, I want to be able to have separate queue management per slices traffic. So this does not address all the SLOs as defined by the slice, but definitely it helps you deal with certain scenarios where, maybe spine leaf deployment, where there's a lot of ECP that you want to leverage, and then you don't want to have a bandwidth thing to worry about. On the control plane, now we are going to keep the data plane as is, which means the data plane can be today's network with either 4 queues or 8 queues per port, and all the traffic of the traffic of multiple slices all fall in within these 8 queues as it goes through that link. But the advantage is if the control plane is slice aware, then we can build a slice specific traffic engineering database. That means we have protocol extensions that will help us populate what is the, can we logically partition the network into a slice, and can we logically partition the resources of a router into a slice, and communicate this information to the traffic engineering database at the ingress of the PCE, so that path can be computed per slice, and and these paths can be placed separately, so that we can then take advantage of the intelligence that is built in the PCE. But thereby still leaving the data plane as is, which is just a slice unaware 4 to 8 queues that is possible. Now, this is possible in networks where you don't want to upgrade all your routers, and you just want to upgrade your PCE, and you have abundant parallel paths that you want to leverage to be able to deploy network services, slicing services. The third one, which is a combination of the two, this gives the most flexibility, the very powerful solution where the traffic engineering database is slice specific. So the PCE can compute the paths per slice as per the need based on the utilization of the slice specific resources consumed in the network. And as the packets are sent within the network, each packet will have a slice selector, so that each router along the path will be applying the protocol behavior slice queue management, so that you know exactly how EFQ is utilized in the network, and you know that slice traffic is going to have its own separate EFQ, for example, and therefore you're not really running into either congestion in the network. And if you run into congestion because of the bursty traffic, the PCE is slice specific awareness that can recompute the paths and place the paths accordingly. Okay. Now, with this mode, let me conclude the overall solution, what we've talked about, what I just talked about. So the slice definition is independent of the underlay technology. That's something that we are significantly different from other proposals out there. And we are specifically keeping the data plane and the control plane decoupling, so that this is the reason why we've seen in the decoupling is the reason for all the scalability that we've seen in all the protocol extensions that we have seen so far in the internet, right? And the data plane selector, the data plane identifier, is flexible enough. We talked about various options, and that gives a good amount of options for the customer to deploy as per their need. And we have a topology that can be built per slice, so you can then select what nodes you want to be selecting and what links you want to be able to selecting for that, right? And this integrates well with the traffic engineering controller, the PCE, and the 3 modes that we just talked about does offer a lot of flexibility for what we have seen. With that, this is my last slide. Let me just talk about, refer to, we have posted a couple drafts that define what I just talked about, the base model, and expands more on each of the topics. And we also have a Yang data model that we have published. And we are planning to look at a few more extensions that I talked about from our protocol extensions and associated with that areas. We are going to be posting more drafts as we go forward. So with this, Dhruv, I've done with my presentation. So any questions, either for your topic or for my topic, we can take those questions here.
Thank you. Any questions? Please feel free to use. I know it's quite late. We overshoot our time. You guys know us. If not now, just do reach us to us. There's one question. Data plane slicing is very similar to class-based forwarding. Could you expand?
Yes. In the data plane slicing, one of the significant differences is, yes, at the outside, it is similar to the class-based forwarding, but class-based forwarding today does with only 8 classes, for example, because of EXP bits that we see, right? Now, in case of slicing, you want to be able to have this behavior per slice. So all you're going to be now doing is, once I identify the traffic per slice, then within that slice, can I still use the class-based forwarding? So you get to play with differentiating the traffic of slice 1 to a set of 8 queues, and the traffic of slice 2 to another set of 8 queues, as you see it. Hope it answers what you're looking for.
Yes. Thanks, Srihari. Off to you, Nalini. Okay.
I think she's
maybe
on
I can. Yeah, maybe I can.
Yeah.
It's just like, yeah, go ahead, Nalini.
Oh, sorry. I had the wrong, I didn't have the mute on. Yes, thank you so much for being a part of Connections. It's been a very, very exciting, and we have all the recordings and as well as the slides. Please join us. We have lots of upcoming events in the next years. We will have our very first members meeting for INTC in January, and you can help influence the organization. And of course, in India, we have regular RFCs we love. I'm very happy with the joint U.S.-India cooperation. And of course, we hope to bring other areas into this as well. Dhruv, do you want to say a few final words?
Yeah, of course, we want to thank our sponsors. While we end this conference, without their help, we would not have been able to do it. These 5 days were amazing. Lots of different tracks, lots of different ideas. We tried some new things. Now our final ask would be that we will be sending out a survey. Please provide your feedback so that we will know what worked, what did not work. You have any suggestions? Hopefully the next Connections we'll have face-to-face. I think, at least for me, this will be too late. We tried this experiment. Some people joined, and it was very nice to talk to people. If link is still on, so if somebody wants to socialize, this time it's like late for India, but okay for US folks. So the link is actually available on our webpage. So there is a Zoom meeting if you'd like to socialize as we end this Connections. That would be really great. And that is our last slide. And good day and good night to everyone. Thanks for being part of Connections.
Yes, thank you so much, and I hope to see you guys face to face soon enough. Okay, thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Srihari. Thanks,
Thank you,
Srihari,
Dhruv.
for a great presentation.
Thank you, Nalini. Thank you.
Let me stop.